Good morning, everyone, or good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world today. As you can see from my audio, I'm still fumbling over my words because I've only had a few hours sleep. The whole purpose of today's session is to welcome in or cover Canon's announcement of the R5 Mark II and the Canon EOS R1, a new battery grip or two, and some other accessories. And to do that, I have an expert panel of guests. And without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce them. But just to give you some context, the Canon announcement isn't for another hour, but what we're going to do for that hour leading up to that event, we're going to talk about the latest leaked specifications, the leaked pricing and images that we have for both of these two cameras. So there's no doubt at all anymore of what we're getting at this announcement, the pricing, and at least some of the headline specifications. So let's go ahead and introduce my guests. Some of these guests you might be familiar with that are returning, but let's start from the top. We have Dwayne Patton. He is a bird, nature, and wildlife photographer. He doesn't see, Dwayne, it's probably afternoon for you, but I'm still trying to wake up here. I can't get my words out.
No, that's all good.
Dwayne doesn't just shoot wildlife, but lives in it in the northeastern end of Australia and Victoria. He's also an author, an owner, and editorial director of a YouTube channel by the same name. Dwayne, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. G'day to everyone. If to people that follow me, g'day, and if you don't, feel free to check out that channel. I'm into birds and wildlife, and happy to be here to chat about Canon, and I'm really excited.
Well, I am too. So thanks for joining us, Dwayne. Also coming in from Australia, we have Professor Jack Wang. He's a microbiologist and educator and the owner and editorial director of not one, but two YouTube channels. And he's also a street photographer, but he's not a Canon shooter. He shoots with Sony and Nikon, so he's providing us with a bit of a reality check. If we drink too much of that Canon Kool-Aid, Professor Jack will certainly bring us down to earth. Jack, welcome back to the channel.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everyone. It's nighttime here in Australia, and yes, I am an imposter. I'm a Sony and Nikon shooter, but if I'm honest, I'm currently between systems. We talked about this last time, Simon, and I'm really keen to see what Canon has to offer to see if they can make me jump ship.
Very well. Well, thank you for joining us, Professor Jack. And to bring in our third guest, he's a first-timer on this channel. His name is Graham Kearney, and he's an equestrian, wildlife, and nature photographer. And like most of us, he's kind of ventured into video to meet his client needs. Graham is at home shooting on f2.8 with lenses like the 100-300 and other fast super telephoto zooms and primes. Graham, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Simon. How's it going? Morning. Hi, everyone.
And where are you joining us from?
I am in Dubai. So it's currently about 1 in the afternoon here. Super hot outside. Probably about 48, 46 degrees. So got the aircon blasting, keep cool inside.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And the last guest, we do have another guest that's supposed to be coming, but he's having technical issues. I would like to welcome Brian Redding to the channel. You might be familiar with his YouTube channel, The Deaf Director. Brian is an award-winning cinematographer and director, but is also a commercial, travel, architectural, and culinary photographer. And it's a pleasure to have Brian with us this morning. Brian, thank you for joining us on the channel.
Thanks, man. Really excited. I think like a lot of people out there, this is an announcement we have been waiting a long time. So I'm very, very excited to see how Canon is approaching and upping the game here, especially since we've seen the R5C for a while. And honestly, even the Canon C400, that was a really interesting announcement. I'm going to be interested to see what Canon brings to the game here, video spec wise too, for this Canon R5 Mark II, for those of us out there that are Canon shooters.
Yeah, no, a very good point. And before I get into the latest leak specifications, just to remind you that the actual Canon announcement will be coming up at the bottom end of this hour, and we'll cover that live. Now, just one thing for those of you joining us, if you are considering buying either the R5 Mark II or the Canon EOS R1, please consider using my affiliate links for either the R5 Mark II or the Canon EOS R1. I do have them in the description down below. It doesn't cost you anything extra. It takes you directly to Be a Nature Adorama, and it's one of those things that really does help keep this channel going. But I do need to be transparent and let you know there is a chance I get anywhere from 3 to 8% back depending on whether you choose to buy something or not. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at what has come out over the past 24 hours. I put out a video last night where we had the Canon EOS R1 specs. Now, the specs that we have here, you're going to see they are a little bit light on information. That's because this is what we know to be, well, validated, confirmed. There's other information that you saw from Canon Rumors and even on this channel, but what I'm working with here is actual confirmed information that I'm willing to take to the bank and tell you that the R1 definitely has a 24 megapixel stacked sensor. It has a next generation dual pixel autofocus, not a quad pixel autofocus system. And in terms of video, it can shoot 6K up to 60 frames per second raw. And it's got a Sony EVF. Well, I'm not, sorry, I shouldn't say that, but it's got the same resolution as the Sony. Jack is laughing. 9.44 million dot with a 0.9 magnification. And of course, dual CF Express Type B card slots. And a price, guys, it's less than what we expected of $62.99. Although B&H, one thing, if you get their Paybu card, you can avoid paying tax, which will save you about 8.5% there. I do have it on very good information, though, that the R1 is going to have incredible signal-to-noise ratio, very clean high ISO, and 2 milliseconds readout, which I think is something that Graham... well, Graham, let me jump to you because you shoot with... What do you shoot with right now?
So I use predominantly the R3. I think it's been an incredible camera in the sense of the speed, the readout speed, the processing, the autofocus, the IBIS. So it's been an incredible camera for me.
So what do you think of these specifications in relation to what you have with the R3?
The megapixels doesn't bother me because I don't need more megapixels for what I'm doing. Obviously, let's see if there's a slight improvement in the quality of the video, the autofocus. If there's an improvement on that, fantastic. You know, the R3 is not perfect, but it is, when I'm shooting video, when it locks onto its subject, it doesn't matter what happens. If the subject moves behind another object or another rider comes in front, it locks onto that the subject. I'm over the moon with the quality, so this can only be an improvement.
Dwayne, your thoughts on that? I see you nodding.
Yeah, no, it's obviously good. I've used the R3 like Graham, but for birding, we're slightly different because we always crop most of the time. So megapixels is probably extremely important for our caper. So majority of bird photographers actually use the R5 over the R3 just for those 45 megapixels. So yeah, look, it's very impressive. So it'll be interesting to see how it compares to the Sony A9 III in terms of buffer, FPS, and all autofocus and all that sort of thing. But interesting, the price drop, considering the 1DX Mark III was $6.5, and that was a long time ago. So I'm assuming that's because the Z9 is priced so aggressively. I think that's $5,500. So perhaps that's why it's priced that way. But you know, if it just builds on the R3, it's going to be great because that is a good camera.
Thank you very much. And Brian, does the R1 interest you in any way whatsoever? Because I know you're a photographer, but you're also a videographer, a cinematographer. What do you think? And what I'm showing right now is Canon Rumors has posted additional specifications that was just posted about 20 or 30 minutes ago. I mean, obviously stuff like dust and weather resistance, that's a given. We knew about action priority mode because that was in their press release. But what do you think about this camera? And I agree with you, Dwayne, that I think that Nikon Z9 has saved us a few dollars on this camera.
Yeah, I mean, the R1 for me is one of those cameras that it's an incredible powerhouse of a camera. But for me professionally, how I make my money, the specs of that don't make sense for me personally. Just because, you know, I'm not in a situation where I need to get an image up within a couple minutes of shooting it. Commercially, I can go shoot. I'll have a day or so to take care of it. And also from a video perspective, I just have to say personally, if I'm going to spend over $6,000 on a camera for video at this stage of the game, you know, honestly, it's like the C400 is $1,800 more and does a lot more professionally video, internal NDs, triple base ISO. SDI, all that stuff. That for me personally, if I was going to spend that much for a camera for video, I would probably just go for the C400. Honestly, maybe even not the lack of an internal ND in a system like this for over $6,000 just doesn't make the R1 what I would consider a camera that'll appeal to me, how I make my money, just because of I'm a, video shooter, but the stuff I shoot is also it's not as, I don't need that fast, quick turnaround. And honestly, I want the extra megapixels because that does matter to my clients and what I do.
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple of things here. And I think when we get into the R5 Mark II, that's something, Brian, that is going to, I certainly speak more to me and you. But I don't normally like to go into things that are controversial. But this whole 24 megapixels is enough. It's not enough. We need 45, we need 61. And what I would like to do without throwing things at people, verbally or literally, I'd like to understand a bit more the why and the results behind where 24 megapixels makes sense on the R1 or where 45 megapixels would make more sense from the viewpoint of sports, fast action, photography, nature. Dwayne, do you want to start us off with that discussion?
I think it makes sense for sport. I think with sport, the lenses they're using, the 400 2.8, the 300, they're full frame most of the time, and 24 megapixels, it's a certain size, so it's smaller images. So when they are processing and going through quick and sending it off, and just the whole streamline, I'm assuming, is easier. And the buffer for Canon has always been an issue. So 24 megapixels means the R1 will have a much bigger buffer than if it was 40, 45, etc. I don't think professionals want to be hitting a buffer, and so that's probably why the predominantly 24 is fine. So if you're not having to crop, it's big enough. But if you do crop, or you've got clients like Brian was referencing, maybe they want bigger files. So I think that's the main reason why they've gone with 24. Is it's just for the majority of people that will have that camera, for that purpose, it will be enough for most people, I assume.
Graham, I'm curious to get your thoughts. I know that when you're out shooting, it's not uncommon to go to an event and come home with something like 10, 20, 30, or even 40,000 images. So I know the fastest of the fastest, having dual CF Express cards, being able to get the content off quickly matters. But in terms of, I would love to get your viewpoint on 24 megapixels versus 45 megapixels, what you do, the kind of work you do. And I think we've got some sample images that I can bring up to help illustrate that. Where do you want to start off, Graham?
Okay, so in my field of work, I kind of do a bit of everything. I started out as a wildlife artist, and the photography kind of became a part to what I was doing, in the sense of being able to capture the reference that I needed. And it slowly progressed into the equestrian side of things, and now doing a lot of equestrian sporting events. So I kind of shoot right across the board. When I was shooting DSLRs, I had the whole range of the top end bodies, for the 1D, the 1Ds, the 5D Mark IV, and everything was amazing. And it took a lot of thought before I said, right, I'm going to get rid of everything and I'm going to move over to mirrorless. When I started with the mirrorless, I looked at the R5 and the R6. The only reason I went with the R6 to start off with was because of the better low light capabilities in the environment of where I shoot. I then got the R3 bodies, which were absolutely incredible, and just took the ability of shooting in a sporting environment to a whole new level. So I think the need of having 24 megapixels in a sporting environment as opposed to 45 is essential in the turnaround time. As I mentioned, I go to some of the bigger sporting events, the show jumping events, and I'll come away with 30, 40,000 images. And that's just the images that have to be processed. Then there's video as well. And the video, you can see that with the R3, that's shot with combination of the 400 2.8 and the 100 to 300. And I may come away with 3-4 terabytes of data that has to be processed. And to suddenly have that massive amount from something like an R5 Mark II doesn't make sense to me. However, the R5 Mark II sounds like it's going to be an incredible camera, which I definitely will get for the wildlife and for the portraiture. So I think, again, for me, I will use both cameras, and they're both going to serve a purpose. But as a dedicated sport photographer or a photojournalist or anybody involved in journalism, the R1 is going to be the camera of choice. Processing, size of files, autofocus, IBIS, all of that kind of thing.
Thank you, Graham. Now, Jack, you've been a little bit quiet, and that's mostly my fault because I haven't given you a chance to speak. What are your thoughts on the R1 and how it would fit into your work in comparison to what you're familiar with on the Sony line?
So I think the closest comparison in terms of specs, but not in terms of body, because this is quite a different body, is the A9 III. And I think the interesting discussion around A9 III is the limits of global sensors. And that global shutter may be leading to a small compromise in IQ or a really big compromise in IQ, depending on your workflow. And it seems like this has all the speed that you would need without any, if many, compromises in IQ. And I think that's really interesting on the 24 megapixel side of things. So I shoot street and travel. I'm not processing 30 to 40,000 photos like you. Thankfully, Graham, I would go crazy if it was 30, 40,000 photos of the street. But I'm capped. I need a freeze motion, and I shoot a lot at night. So high ISO performance is really crucial for me because shooting f1.2 doesn't make sense for all kinds of street. And if I'm shooting at night, I have to really have a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th. So even with IBIS, high ISO performance is really important for my work. So 24 megapixels makes a lot of sense to me, but this body style doesn't really make that much sense to me personally for my workflow. Yeah.
No, I'm the same, and I think this is a good transition at 15 minutes in to take a look at our next camera that's going to be announced, and there was some doubt of this. I do want to say a little bit of a correction to what I posted yesterday. I did put a correction in the header of the description. That's simply down here with the 4K. I had mentioned it was 4K up to 120 SRAW. It's 4K up to 60 frames per second SRAW, 8K up to 60 frames per second RAW. It is confirmed to be 45 megapixel stacked full frame backside illuminated sensor. This one here, I'm a little bit curious. So 4K, 24, 25, 50, 60, 100, 120, and 10-bit 422. Well, what else? Canon log 1, 2, 3, maybe a Canon log 4, I don't know. Could it also go up to 240 frames per second or 150 or 180 in 4K? I don't know. This is just what I know to be true. There's other specifications out there indicating higher frame rates. I know Canon Rumors has said the camera can go up to, I think, 240 frames per second in 2K. I don't have any of that. This is limited information that I know to be true. And of course, we'll know at the bottom of the hour whether that's true or not. The EVF, 5.76 million dot with a 0.76 magnification. And it's going to get pixel shift, although Canon doesn't call it pixel shift. It is going to be 179 megapixels. Hopefully, and I know it's going to be an improvement over the R5 Mark I, but how good will it be? And the price, this has surprised a lot of us. So despite the Nikon Z8 being around $3,500, the R5 Mark II is $100 more than my peak range. I was thinking somewhere between $39.99 and $41.99. It's $42.99. And we do have some pictures that I'll scroll through the pictures as we open it up to the floor. I want to start with you, Jack, because now this is a camera that hits a little bit more into your wheelhouse. What do you think of these latest specifications for the Canon EOS R5 that we know to be true? How does it ring true to you? I know we don't have a lot of specifications here. Actually, there is one thing I forgot to put in here, and that is that it shoots up to 30 FPS continuous. So put that in there. So take it away, Jack. What do you think of these specs based on what you shoot?
So this is a much more exciting camera for my kind of workflow. I did own and shoot the Sony A1 for a long time, but this is essentially beating, if not matching, all the specs of the Sony A1, which granted is an older model, but it's significantly cheaper because the Sony A1 is still remarkably expensive, even 2-3 years after release. The fact that it had a fully stacked sensor at 50 megapixels was shocking at that time, but now that it's able to be offered at this lower price point is really impressive. And I guess what I'm interested in asking is people who already shoot with the current R5, if your image quality is good enough for your purposes, if you'd rather better IQ or more speed, because I'm not sure if the new sensor would bring with it any IQ compromises. Usually going fully stacked has some weird dynamic range effects, but relatively minor in the big scheme of things. And this is the one that I've got my eye on.
Dwayne, one of the things I think about when I look at this camera at $4,300, there's been a few comments going like, this is way too much. It's too expensive. But then again, if I go back just, a year and a half ago, people said there's no way the Nikon Z8 is going to do a stacked sensor for under $4,000. But here we are. We've got the R5 II with a stacked sensor. Where do you feel about the R5 II based on these specifications and also the pricing?
I think the price is a little bit high, especially when we take into account overseas pricing. So Jack and I will be looking at about 7,500 Australian dollars, which is a lot of money. The R5 was around 6,800, something like that. And if we look at the progress, I think the 5D4 was 3,400 and then 3,800 and now 4,200 US. It's a lot of change, 7,500 Australian dollars. So that's quite expensive. You are getting obviously a lot for that, but it's an interesting pricing considering the Nikon is cheaper. But so I think they just know it's a popular camera and people are going to buy it. So they're probably going to make a little bit there. And it's interesting, the difference between the R5 II and the R1, I think it's $2,000 now, isn't it? So the difference is $2,000, whereas the difference between the 1DX3 and the 5D4 was like $3,000. So that gap is definitely closed between the R5 II and the R1. Just in terms of, Jack mentioned the IQ, I can't see there being much difference, if at all, in terms of the IQ. I'm confident that they'll be very, very similar. The stack sensor is definitely great. However, I'm not sure it's going to be anywhere near as fast as the Sony or the Nikon. I think the Nikon's 4 milliseconds. I'm suspecting the R5 II will be 7 or 8 milliseconds. So there still will be a little bit of wobbles there probably if you're moving the camera. So it's still going to be an improvement over the R5. It's just not going to be anywhere near as fast as the R3 or any of those other cameras. So that's really good. The 30 frames per second is good. I'm not sure if I should mention it now, I'm probably talking too much, but I think we're still going to have a buffer issue. So for those that aren't aware, when we shoot wildlife, Graham, you'll be aware of this, is the Canons have a hard buffer. So when we hit the buffer, the camera just stops taking photos. And this has been my biggest bugbear of all Canon mirrorless cameras, is once we hit that buffer, we have to wait before we can shoot again. If you have ever shot Sony or any of the other brands, they just reduce the frame rate and let you continue shooting at a reduced frame rate, which is how it should be. I'd hoped that the R5 II and R1 would probably not a big issue on the R1, but I suspect the R5 II still has a hard buffer. I think it's going to be about 10 seconds in C-RAW, which is better than the R5 by about 2 seconds, but we will still have a hard buffer.
Thank you. Brian, so we're now talking about a camera that's more in your wheelhouse. I know both you and I have the R5, and I know you and I, we did a bit of a tag team last year when they released firmware 1.6, which finally gave us a camera where we could shoot without worrying about it overheating. What do you think of these specs for the R5 Mark II?
This is, if I got to be completely honest right now, I do feel this is probably a bit underwhelmed. There are just some things that we just haven't heard yet. You have to realize, I feel like the Canon R5 II, it's not just competing against Sony cameras. Let's be honest, it's competing against the R5 Mark I, and you can get an R5 for $700 cheaper at this point too. And, right now, I don't know. Are we going to have dual base ISO? Like having the Canon R5C, that 3200 actual dual base ISO in the R5C is extremely, extremely useful, especially in video. I'm actually really excited about the idea of this 240 frames per second. I've used that on some Sony cameras before, and to be honest, that comes in very useful if you have a decent 2K. I'm also haven't heard anything about whether or not we're in a situation, is the the HQ, that 4K HQ, are we going to have oversampled 4K now? for all of it, or are we have to make compromises where there's the 4K HQ and the regular 4K? I'd be very interested to see that, because if you take things even like 60 frames per second and stuff on the R5C versus the R5, you know, what kind of quality hit are you taking at some of those frame rates? Those are things I'd like to know. So right now, I'm would say I'm cautious. There are some incredible stuff. I'd really love to see what they're doing with the autofocus. One thing I think that would be a huge improvement over the current Canon R5 and R5C is, I think you mentioned, Simon, on one of your earlier rumors that the camera was going to be able to do a better EV range that would allow the autofocus to work better in low light situations. And I do know one thing, even on the Canon R5C and especially the Canon R5, if I am shooting or ISO, the AF really struggles in video mode. And I think that is something I would like to see as well. So I think right now we have about 35 minutes. I'm cautious. Like, there's a lot of potential there that I think we haven't heard one way or another that could make this a wow camera. I think as you described some potential things, or okay, that's a nice upgrade. I think at this point, I'm still waiting to really see what those specs come out specifically. But man, I'll be honest, I would love to see things like the dual base ISO, things like that, if it's official in the camera.
Okay, so a lot of really good points here. I want to bring up this $42.99 as a US price. What Dwayne said and Jack commented on, in Australia, you know, that's around $77,000. And in Canada, it's probably going to be, I paid $6,000 for the Mark I, and with the exchange rate and this new price, I'm probably closer to, well, not quite $7,000, but $6,600, $6,700. And that certainly has an impact. So it really boils down to, what are these capabilities? And you know, 8K 60 sounds great, but you know, I really want to know, does it have dual base ISO? The Mark I does, but it's not something that's really talked about. The R1 is supposed to have triple base ISO. The R5 Mark II, I would expect it to have dual base ISO. The autofocus improvements really make a huge difference too. I was just showing you a clip of some stuff I shot in Niagara Falls this weekend, and that was on the boat, the Hornblower, and that was the R5 showing off its weather sealing. That was unprotected, and I don't recommend taking your camera into a situation like that because you do risk damaging it. But to have more dynamic range, to have a better autofocus system, not a faster autofocus system, but an autofocus system that can say, okay, look, I had my son on, let's bring it up again. I had my son on the Hornblower on the boat, and I have to find the spot again. Somewhere around here, and this is for so here he is, and you're going to see that it really picks up, and the wind is really hitting us, coming at us really strong. But the other thing I want to talk about is that slow motion, that 240 frames per second. This is 4K 120 coming up, and what that really allows you to do is to slow things down so you can see the majesty of certain things. This is the 100 to 500 shooting down from the Skylon Tower, and right coming up, look at that. That is really where you see the dynamic range, you see the autofocus system, you see the color, you see everything kind of working together. And what I want to be able to see is improvements there. To be able to shoot 240 frames per second, wow, that really tells a story. Now, that is going to be in 1080, but I think what we're going to find out is when shooting in 1080, to get that speed, I think it's going to make a huge difference. But I want to welcome another guest who's just joined us. He had trouble. He was on time, but for whatever reason, technology played a role in James having trouble entering the room. So James Jackson is a photographer, videographer, well, more of a videographer, a director of photography. I can't speak this morning. James, it's early for you too, right?
Oh yeah, it's early. Yeah, don't worry about it. I don't got coffee. I got a little cup of water to get me through the morning. Apologies. My computer decided it needed a graphics card update before I could actually send a video signal out to Ecamm. So always perfect timing for that. But thank you, Simon, for having me on here.
No, it's a pleasure. We were just showing the leak specifications for the R5 Mark II. These are what I got from my source yesterday. I'm willing to bet they're 100% bang on, other than a few typos I might have made in the video yesterday. $42.99 for the R5 Mark II. you put out a video not too long ago. And by the way, guys, what I want to do, I want to take everybody up to the top here before I give them a chance to answer. Please go ahead and subscribe to these channels. This is James Jackson Films. Subscribe to his channel. I can't believe he's only got 4,340 subscribers. He deserves a whole lot more than that with his knowledge of cinematography. Graham Kearney, he has an Instagram channel. Bouquet Therapy by Jack Wang. I really love that title. Give them a subscribe. Same with Dwayne. They're coming here. I'm not paying them to come here, paying them to say anything. They're coming here at their own accord. So the best way to show your appreciation is to go ahead and subscribe and follow them. So James, these are the specs for the R5 Mark II. $42.99, more expensive than we thought. You were starting to, I can't remember the words you chose, but it was something to the effect of, I'm waning on the idea of the R5 Mark II. What are your thoughts today based on that camera?
I'm kind of curious. I guess I'm still sort of curious, but the pricing, I mean, me and you kind of talked about it late last night. The pricing really shocked me. Because I'm looking at this, I'm like, it's essentially an R5C with, I mean, the only other thing is like, it probably may come with Analog 2, but then I'm still wondering about the sensor's capabilities because all accounts, it doesn't look like it's going to be a DGO sensor. And Analog 2 works the best when it, at least we've seen so far from Canon with a DGO sensor. So I'm curious to see how the sensor will handle it because C-Log 2 is a very shadow lifting aggressive log curve. Does great dynamic range if the sensor can handle it. But to me, it's just like right now, before anything is officially announced and before we learn anything more, I'm kind of a bit underwhelmed at this point. But again, we'll see when we get the full specs. The autofocus improvements are not going to necessarily be a big thing for me personally because I basically use city glass, so autofocus is not necessarily a thing for me, really. And then for terms of dynamic range, there's a lot more to dynamic range. I know stacked sensors tend to help, but there's a lot more with bit depth and other things. But I just see right now from what I'm seeing, I'm like, there's a lot of features that basically sound like this is the R5C, but this is what Canon wanted the R5 to initially be, but they had to put out the R5C because I don't see in terms of features that much of a dramatic improvement from the cinema. So I'm wondering, well, what's the point, especially if you could get an R5C right now around $3,000 and sometimes even under $3,000 on the used market.
Okay, so what
It's
I want to do
probably.
now... Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's probably more stills. They probably haven't. I don't really shoot video. It's just probably they've increased the stills capability of the camera. Probably that's where most of the improvements I think in this model are. If you're saying the video's similar, so I suspect it's mainly just to increase the stills performance versus the Z8. That's what I believe is why they've coming up with this body, perhaps.
Graham, I know that you shoot with the R3, but I also know that some wildlife and photographers, nature photographers, will use the R5 for those situations where if they're shooting eagles or other birds in flight where they need more information. Now that we've seen the specifications for the R5 Mark II, what are your thoughts on this camera in relation to the R1 or the R3 for the type of work you do? And why would you use it or not use it?
Look, I'll definitely get the R5 Mark II. The only reason I didn't get the R5 Mark I is because I know that there was a Mark II version coming out. So it was kind of, I'd rather just wait for it. But, you know, for the side of work where it does come to the wildlife, the bird photography, the portraiture, having those extra megapixels is going to be really important in the sense of I don't have that time frame of having to have a quick turnover, getting files out, processing huge amounts of content. So for me, the R5, it's Mark II is another camera I can't wait to get. The price, it's something that doesn't bother me. I'm just going to get it. It's because I earn a living from photography, the income that is generated goes back into purchasing more equipment. It is a little more expensive, but as I say, I think you've just got to accept the fact that things get more expensive as time goes on. I think the only thing that I'm really keen to see on is the overheating issues. I'm hoping that's going to be sorted out, because I know that it was an issue with the R5, although that there was the firmware update that did sort it out. But it's going to be very interesting to see just what capabilities this R5 Mark II has got, especially in an environment like this where we do, during the summer months, hit temperatures of 50 degrees. So that's going to be, I'm very excited about it, and I'm looking forward to it.
It's an interesting comment that Ron brought up. At $3,800, I'm getting it at $4,299 and waiting for Black Friday. I'm almost wondering if Canon's building in a little bit of extra price so they can shave it off within the year. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. But in terms of pricing, Dwayne, Jack, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, because I mentioned this in the pre-show. Is the R5 Mark II worth $1,400 more than the Mark I, which is currently $2,899? Your thoughts?
For me, no. I'm actually thinking about a used R5 Mark I myself, given how good it is for the stills that I do. And Dwayne has talked about this in the comments. We pay a literal and figurative tax being in Australia. The exchange rate never works in our favor, and there's GST on top. And so the Nikon Z6 III was 2,500 USD, but for us it's 4,500 Australian. So like double the price. We're just used to it, and I always have to wait for a sale, unfortunately. Yeah, Dwayne.
Look, I'm sort of in the same boat as Graham, is that I do make a living, so I can justify the cost. But I'm more looking for other people. Like if you're a hobbyist and you like bird photography or wildlife photography, and you've got money to spend, you can pick up a used R5 in Australia for probably $2,500 to $2,500 in that price bracket, compared to $7,500 or $7,000 for a new R5 too. So I suspect a used R5 is going to be half the price. So and what are we getting for that extra $3,000 for the new one? You are definitely getting a lot of improvements, but the actual images are going to be very, very similar. They're both 45 megapixels. The original R5, which I have here, is still 20 frames per second. It's still a beautiful camera that produces excellent photos. So unless you really want the pre-capture, you want 30 frames per second, maybe slightly improved autofocus, it's only a little incremental improvements. So I think if you're on a budget, getting the original R5 would make more sense. But for people that, if money's not a problem, well, it's clearly going to be worth the upgrade.
Great comments.
I'm very tempted to actually just get a second. I'm really contemplating getting an R5 just as another camera body to have, because as a photographer, where the equipment that myself and my team use on a weekly basis, it gets hammered, it gets worked really, really hard, and you're always going to end up with issues where you end up with a problem somewhere along the line. And to have that backup, and the R5, as Dwayne said, is an amazing camera. It really, really is. So there can only be improvements on this one, and for somebody that is looking for that quality but doesn't maybe just need the latest version, the R5 Mark I is still something that they can really get for a good price. And a lot of people are getting rid of their bodies now in preparation for the Mark II. And I've seen some R5 bodies here in the UAE for literally next to nothing. So it's definitely a good option.
I just want to let you guys know, James, you can continue in a second, but we just got some more leaked information from Canon rumors, and there's some pretty interesting stuff here. The action priority mode for the R1 is also coming to the R5 Mark II, but it's supposed to be also having, you'll be surprised to hear this, Canon Log 2 is going to be coming to the R5 Mark II. And they did confirm, as I was saying all along, that it's going to have a whole new design, backside illuminated stacked sensor, 45 megapixels. And it's going to have the same EVF as the R3. So some really, some what I would consider to be some really interesting capabilities. But this one here, guys, So the R5C, those video menus, EOS
Oh,
Cinema
It's interesting.
I've got
terminology.
as a Canon R5C user, that actually scares me.
It
I'm going
scares
to,
me a little bit too.
and I'm going to tell you why. If you use the Canon R5C, hands down, one of the most incredibly aggravating things about Canon R5C is they put the Cinema OS, which is fantastic. I love it. But Canon really has ignored, really until the latest 1.0.71 update that just came out for the Canon R5C, they've really ignored a lot of what the body design of a Canon mirrorless is in the Cinema OS. A classic example of this, on the Canon R5C, you have a wireless and Bluetooth in the video, in the photo mode, but the Cinema OS won't recognize it in the video mode, which is incredible. Until last week, you couldn't use the select dial on the back end video mode. It's little things like that that actually feel. I love having the video mode, but Canon up to date has sort of crammed a Cinema OS mirrorless body without accepting the fact that the mirrorless body is different than the C300. It's different than the C500. So that kind of leads me to believe, is Canon going to do the same thing with the R5 Mark II? Or are they going to make a Cinema OS system that truly embraces the form factor of the R5 body? So that's something that could be amazing or a little frustrating. I think that's definitely interesting.
It's important to note that the video menus will use the terminology. It won't have, according to this, it's not going to have that complete switch over to the Cinema EOS operating system. So it's just going to use Cinema EOS terminology, which that I'll be fine with. So yeah, the only other question is full-size HDMI or not. Guys, I just realized here, I've never had this many people watching a live stream. We have 914 concurrent viewers at this point, guys. That's the most ever. And I think that tells you that there's an awful lot of interest in these two cameras. But I want to say a big thanks to you for watching at home. A big thanks to my guests, because without you, this channel would be nothing. I started this 5 years ago, and it was just because of a love of cameras. And I wanted to improve and learn more. And I think that's how we all start out, isn't it, Graham? You start out not being an expert. You just try and try. You sometimes feel like you're bashing your head against the wall. And what I always like to do in those situations is put a lemon right here, tape it around my head. So when I bash my head against the wall, at least I can taste the sour Devite. Right, so
I'll bash my head. That's part of the growing process, part of learning. If you're not bashing your head on a weekly basis, you're not learning. You're not improving.
Amen to that.
I think the other thing that's worth noting is, whilst we're talking about specs, it's not until you actually use a camera that you notice these things. Like going from the R6 to the R6 II, it's pretty obvious. And the EVF of the R3, when you use the R3, it's such a beautiful camera. Looking through it, it's nice and big. The R5 II is now going to have that EVF, which is going to make a big difference, which is fantastic. And that faster sensor is going to remove some of that rolling shutter, which is good that I can see there. I haven't used the eye tracking. Do you use that, Graham, at all? The actual eye auto?
To be honest,
I
no.
didn't. I didn't either.
I've never really, it's never really grown on me in the sense of there's a lot of stuff going on, especially in equestrian sports. It's so quick. There's no time to mess around and experiment and look this way. You're playing with fire. So I very seldomly use it. It would be fantastic if you, for instance, have got a group of people in a giving a speech and you want to focus and look. But yeah, we'll see what the improvements are. But I'm not holding my breath for that, because it's not something I'm really going to use a lot of.
One thing I noticed, which is slightly annoying and I don't like on the R6 II, is that the video to stills is on the left-hand side of the camera. So it's where the on-off is now on the R5. And for me, when I'm shooting wildlife, my left hand is often on my lens or on the tripod for support. So to switch quickly to video, I've got to pull my left hand up, switch to video. I'd much rather go video stills on my right hand. So that's one slight.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. It drives me up the wall. That's one of my biggest pet peeves with the R3 is that little switch between video and photograph. It's quite small. And there's times where you don't quite catch it and you miss. And I thought, I still said, this is what they need to improve on. If they can have a larger switch like they have on the R6 Mark II, where you physically, you're going to flip it, fantastic. But I see now the R5 Mark II's got it on the left-hand side, and I shoot the same thing. I don't have time to sit and move my hands around, especially in a course where I've got horses moving very quickly past me over jumps, and I now have to start fumbling around with switches. So it's the one thing I'm not too happy about.
Guys, I don't know if you'd noticed some of these specs here. We can celebrate. People are going to buy the camera just for this one feature. Full-size HDMI, which is good. It also has a higher amperage battery, and it's confirmed all the leaked specifications that I put out, that it's going to have SRAW and 4K, RAW up to 8K 60. It's going to have Canon Log 2, that's confirmed, as well as Canon Log 3, and waveform monitors, as well as 24-bit 4-channel recording. There's some other information here, an awful lot of information that Canon Rumors just put out. And it's going to have that Digic accelerator chip. So that's good news. It's getting a lot of the same stuff that the R1 is getting. Not exactly a mini R1, but I don't think that's what people are looking for. It's got this new time to focus, and I haven't had a chance to read it. I'm just scanning through. They confirmed that it's going to have Canon's eye-controlled autofocus, and it's a more advanced version than the one found in the EOS R3. And you'll also be able to calibrate the viewfinder. Totally new sensor, and this is what I've been saying all along. I told you this many months ago before anybody else picked up on it. A completely new redesigned sensor. The full-frame sensor is stacked, backside illuminated, allowing for improved performance, faster readout. Let's see, what else does... Pre-continuous shooting is now possible in electronic mode. And they're just saying, oh, wait a minute. When the shutter is pressed halfway, the camera begins capturing images, and when fully pressed, previous half a second. So there's no option to increase that, at least not now, maybe in a firmware update. I'm not going to read through all this. You guys can read that as we're talking, because it's basically the same thing that we got in the Canon EOS R1. There's some other images of the camera. Let's see, what else do we have down there? There's just so much information coming out now. I don't have the time to read this because I'm managing the channel. And yeah.
I wanted to. So somebody was asking the chat and asked directly to me, because now that you mentioned that they are confirming that C-Log 2 is canceled, does it worth it? It definitely helps, but again, it all comes down to what that sensor is capable of, because C-Log 2 is very, very aggressive logarithmic curve. Because Canon has had that for a while. They had it in the C300 Mark II. And it was unusable, almost unusable in the C300 Mark II, because the noise was just very, very bad. Even when I had this Canon C200, C-Log 2, you had to really overexpose it in order to preserve the blacks in Canon Log 2. So I'm curious to see how does the sensor handles the aggression of the noise, but I think it will definitely help try to this will help put the R5 II alongside cameras like they just announced, like the Canon EOS C400. I still am. I'm not. The $4,300 is still. It's still weary, because I'm glad that they're adding waveforms, but it doesn't say anything about false color. Will it offer a shutter angle? These were things that are in the R5C that, for me as a video user, because I don't do any stills. I'm not a hybrid shooter at all. I'm purely a video shooter. I don't even use the EVF. I bring work off the screen. So false color is a major, major importance to me. Waveforms is definitely a step up, and I'm happy for that. False color is the ideal zone. And then there's other things, and I'm glad that they're finally, I think we all again agree that they got a full-size HDMI. It's about damn time.
Yes.
So it's making me feel it's getting there, being worth it, but I'm still looking at it going, I can still, based on the features that they're still offering, just in terms of purely video specs, I'm looking at, is it worth it versus a used R5C, which the R5Cs are going to get flooded in the market. And really, to me, it's going to come down to how well does that sensor handle Canon Log 2. Because if it doesn't handle Canon Log 2 really that well, then no, it's not worth it.
You know that reminds me, James, of the R5 when it came out. I struggled, I thought, with Canon Log 1. I didn't like it. And as soon as Canon Log 3 came out, it was almost as though, well, if somebody wears glasses, it's like putting glasses on versus having glasses off. It was so much easier to grade and worked really well. However, that being said, one tool, and this is not a sale. I don't have any sort of deal with this company, but take a look at a Calibrate. I've got one right here. Calibrate Color Checker. Let's see if I can grab it. I want to show you guys. For those of you not familiar with these things, they really, really do make a huge difference. Especially if you're shooting in what I consider to be really challenging environments. Like if you're shooting in an area where there's an awful lot of green and there's some brown from a fence, and then you've got talent there, you can fight and fight and fight and never get it correct. But this is the Calibrate one. I think it's around $100 US. This one here, you can do your skin tones, you can do your mid-gray, you can do your highlights, mid-tones, and it's really terrific. And I don't use the other ones. The other side of this thing, if you flip it open, you just got a larger white balance card, and of course for focusing. But this here, and you don't have to take it out every time, do you, James or Brian?
No, the Passport is great, but I will say this: if you can afford it, I would get the big boy. The big boy is absolutely worth it because it'll be much easier to basically correct, and if you run into any things off when you get the post, that helps. But the big boy makes it so much easier. But I use it all the time. Like I use it all, especially since I've got cameras that are different. Like right now, my setup is I've got a Blackmagic Cinema camera 6K full frame. I did have a Canon C70, but I just recently sold it and traded in and got a Sony FX3. And being able to use that to basically get the colors lined up, it's such a time saver. So yes, I always get it so where you can make sure all your colors are lined up. Having a color checker card is one of the number one things I would say get.
I'm really curious to know what Graham has to hear about this, and of course there's Graham with his thoughts. Graham?
When it comes to the quick turnaround time for sports photography, there's no time for me to shoot in any of the log settings because it's just to sit and have to then color grade. It's too much. When it comes to the wildlife and more personalized shoots, fantastic. If there's an improvement on the video settings from that side of things, great. But I don't even attempt using C-Log 3 or I think it's C-Log 2. I just don't use it. There's no time. I don't have that ability to sit after a show where people are waiting for their footage to sit and color grade. It would be nice, but in a perfect world, that's not going to happen.
And this is shot with the R3 with Canon Log.
R3.
With
no,
8-bit,
that's
sorry.
8-bit, yes, 8-bit.
Okay.
I just saw that in the comments there was a couple of questions about the R5, the battery. It'd be interesting to see whether you need the new battery for any specific purpose. Does using old batteries reduce any features? Because obviously we've all got, us Canon users, we've got bucket loads of the batteries. If it's a new battery, that could be a concern because they're $150 each in Australia probably. So you're going to have to get some more of those. The new battery grip will be $500 or something. So there's those additional costs. The other interesting thing is whether the frame rate is going to be adjustable. So if it's 30 frames per second, are we getting 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, or are they only going to give us 30, 20? Also interested to hear if they're giving us zebras and stills. That's something that Canon's been lacking, where other brands have that. So
it does
I'm not
have,
holding my breath.
Yeah, not in stills, yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the battery thing is going to be interesting, especially Brian, because with the R5C, you have to use an external battery in order to access those AK60s. So it is possible that you may need this new battery or even this new battery grip with the coolant to access AK60. Because I do remember Canon Rumors originally was saying that there were some caveats with the AK60, and my guess was that it possibly is something similar to the R5C, where you may need either the new battery or you may need an external power in order to access AK60 while also getting all the other features that come with it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I know just from someone that actually has an R5 battery grip to start off with and did use it actually initially was um, it is, if you're using the R5 for video a lot, one thing I'm not a big fan of the R5 battery grip was it just made kind of putting stuff on a gimbal. It's such a high center of gravity. It does take away one of the great things about the R5 is you can throw it on a DJI RS3 or RS4 so quickly and balance it so easily. And I know once I started putting the battery grip on there, it does really change that center of gravity. And I think if you're using the R5, you're probably going to be using a gimbal here, let's be honest, for a lot of the things for video work. So I'll be interested to see, because that does sound, I think James makes a great point. It does sound like, because they're making a big announcement here about the battery grips too. I am very curious to see what your limits are if you don't have that battery grip. If there are any limits, I just don't know. But it'll be very interesting to see what will be the background of that.
And guys, we
Brian,
have
I
5
totally
minutes
agree
to
with
the announcement now. We've got 1,100 of you watching, keenly interested. And what I'm going to do as soon as Canon starts giving the presentation, I'm going to keep the closed captions on. I'm going to turn the audio off so we can, as information comes up, we're going to talk about it. We're going to continue to field your questions. We're going to scan the internet looking for the latest reviews that are coming out once the embargo is lifted. And of course, I'll let you know as soon as the embargo is lifted where you can use the pre-order links. I do have them in the description down below, and every now and then I flash them up on the screen. If you do use these links, they don't cost you anything extra. You don't have to fill in any forms or put in any codes. I do get anywhere from, I think, 3 to 8% back, and it really does help support this channel. So if you're purchasing from within the United States, from B&H, Adorama, and use those links, I really do appreciate it. But I think it's also important to give a shout out to local camera stores with really excellent service. In Canada, I use Downtown Camera, a person by the name of Patrick. His information's in the description down below. It's amazing what these local camera stores can do and how they support you. And it's pre-ordering you can actually get stuff for them pretty quickly. And if you're in Europe, if you're in Australia, again, I highly recommend reaching out to your local camera store. But that's it for my spiel. We got 4 minutes left, and as soon as we go live, I'm going to flash things up.
Yeah, please support your local camera stores. I love B&H, but honestly, it's like without these local camera stores, getting a lot of this stuff would be a lot harder than before. Oh,
Sorry.
And you know what? It's funny because I was actually talking to a major U.S. retailer at one point, and they said we don't want to see the local camera stores go out either, right? Because as big as these stores are, the problem is when they do. Okay, we got a washing machine sound in the background. Who's that coming from? No, I'm just going through and muting people temporarily because I know that will drive people crazy if we hear a whoosh, 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 whoosh sound. All right, sorry, Graham, you've got some.
Yeah, Brian,
I
I just wanted to jump in with what Brian said about the camera ability, the battery for the cameras. So I used obviously the R6 with the battery grip, and one battery, and you are doing a lot of shooting. That battery goes very quickly. The R3 is fantastic because there is a longer battery life, but I don't know how many of you shoot in the 120, the 4K 120. It chows, it literally eats through the battery. So and the issue is the bulkiness. You know, I'm running around at a show, I've got the 2 R3s on either side. One's got the 100 to 300, one's got the 400. It's weight. There's a lot of weight involved in that, and to suddenly have like an R5 Mark II that is going to be slightly lighter, that's what's really appealing, and to be able to put it onto a gimbal. But again, what is that battery life going to be like when it comes to shooting 120 frames a second? How long is that battery going to last for?
Yeah, and the questions keep coming up about the battery too.
Yeah.
Dwayne, what are you hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the autofocus, we haven't really spoken too much about that. Canon is renowned for having amazing autofocus, especially for birds and wildlife. So an improvement would be appreciated. I think they're getting rid of the cases that we're used to in Canon bodies. So I'm not sure what that means, how they're doing that, and how that, how we're going to set those cameras up. So yeah, look, I'm looking forward to seeing how the autofocus performs. The buffer, obviously, those are the main things that I'm interested in. It sounds like the pre-capture is only 0.5 of a second, which is a real bummer. It's going to make it hard to use it with that time. But yeah, exciting.
Do you have any recommendation for stores in Australia? Android asks.
Yeah, there's a few. DigiDirect is a fairly common one here. There's Sun Studios, which is Canon here. TEDs as well. I get my stuff direct from Canon, but that's just me personally. But because they're obviously helpful to me, so that's where I go. But DigiDirect, I've definitely bought stuff off them.
Excellent. Here we go. 1 minute to go. Now they'll probably give us a 2-minute countdown. This is getting exciting. I've never seen this many people on a live stream before. 1,100 people watching along with you. It's really terrific. It's pretty exciting because, as you say, Graham, I'm not like a typical photographer, videographer, because I do have this set up as a business. Oh, let me just turn off the audio. So here we go. We got closed captioning on. I'm able to expense things. So when I buy the R5 Mark II, I can expense it. I know I need a second camera. People say, why not get an R8 or an R6 Mark II? And you're right, but I know from this business, this channel that I have, if I get the R5 Mark II, more people are going to be interested in that. So it makes more sense for me to get it. It's just like the Mark I. When I bought the Mark I had a lot of misgivings because at the time it was blowing up about this thing. You put it in a freezer and it's still going to overheat. And I almost didn't buy it. But I thought, you know what? It's better to buy it and then let people know what I was going through. And I provided a lot of in-depth coverage after that, letting people know. But here we are, 13 seconds, guys. Let's pay close attention to what we're hearing. And I wouldn't be surprised if the embargo is lifted. So I'll let you know as soon as that happens. I'll actually just check that right now.
This is a long time coming. This is a long time coming, son.
Yep, pre-orders available, guys. So if you want to use my links down below, pre-orders available for the Canon EOS R1 and the R5 as we're getting ready to go. I know people are going to go right away and get it. Others are waiting to see more information. Please use my pre-order links in the description down below. They're starting off slowly with some music. The music hasn't put me over the edge yet. So they're going to start off with the Canon EOS R1 here, guys. Graham, I'm really interested in your opinions, what we hear here. So the reason I have the audio turned off is so we can provide a commentary. If you just want to watch their post, feel free to leave us and go to Canon, but we're going to provide our expert opinion on this. Yeah, they're talking about the 1D. Remember, we had two versions of the 1D, guys. We had the 1DX and the 1DC, but the 1DC, I don't think we really talk about that much anymore. And the R3's kind of taken over for the 1DX in many areas. So they're talking about their heritage. Graham, did you have the 1DX?
Yes.
Which one?
Yeah. Mark II. It's a good camera, but just low light capabilities. It couldn't keep up with the R3, even the R6.
And what about the 1DX Mark III? Was there any interest in that?
There was interest, but of course, the R3 had come out, or was a camera that I had my eye on, thinking it was going to be the R1, and just kind of thought, well, let me go. I'm not going to go back to DSLR when I can go mirrorless.
Okay, and our guys are a little bit quiet because what they're doing is they're scanning all the latest reviews that are dropping right now so they can bring you the latest information. It's not that they're disengaged. It's talking about the new autofocus system, and they're talking about Cinema EOS video quality. So that's something we're seeing both the R5 Mark II and the R1 talking about the Cinema EOS team working on the video capabilities. Huh, interesting. I'm surprised they're actually focusing as much on the video aspects of the R1, but and I got really kind of a lot of feedback on this on my last video where I talked about 8-bit is going to be better in the R1. So they're confirming the ISO 100 to 102,000 non-extended. But 8-bit really, really matters because you don't have time to do log. And I think, Graham, you'd agree with that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So 40
But
frames
that's
per
just
second.
for me.
So Jordan at Head of Pixels is saying the waveform is fixed on the screen. You can't move it around, but it is there.
Well, and when you press record, does it stay on there? Because that's another thing too. Canon used to give us some stuff, and as soon as you press record, they went away.
It looks like it stays well as a record.
Excellent. Okay, so powerful new sensor. Yes, they talked about that. Newly developed image processing system, because we now have an extra chip. Okay. So there's that Digic Accelerator.
There's 3 different battery grips.
3. I was told there was a few of them. Now, Donna, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Thank you. So what is the difference between the different battery grips? So yeah, we can see that Digic Accelerator chip really kind of helping with the amount of data. And I said this earlier, the R1 is all about capturing the light, capturing that data, processing that data, filtering the data, and then putting it off to storage. And that is very, very critical, very, very important. So that Digic Accelerator is going to help with that. I also get a sense there's some course that's going to do some sort of neural or machine learning in it to help improve. So talking about the subject accuracy here, this is the new action priority mode. And apparently this is in the R5 Mark II as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what this is going to be able to do.
So Simon, for the battery grips, there's one standard battery grip. There's going to be a battery grip with an Ethernet connection port. And then there's the cooling battery grip.
The active cooling, that's the one I would probably want to get.
Oh. Just got a price in for Australia there for 6,500, which is actually lower than I anticipated, which is DigiDirect. It's saying R5 II 6,500. So that's surprising considering the US price. So it's unusual for Canon to have such a low price in Australia. So that's surprising.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm wondering what it's going to sell for in Canada. Let's do a check here. Oh, I don't have the Canadian price yet. All right, never mind. So they're talking about the autofocus system. They're talking about eye-controlled autofocus. I am curious with this, but with the new action priority mode, I wonder if there's any need for it. So it is a 24.2 megapixel sensor, guys, not 24. We're pretty close on that one. What are you thinking, Brian? Anything you found out?
You know, I'm this is all stuff I was kind of expecting. I'll be, if I got to be completely honest, I'm just anxiously awaiting the R5 II more than anything, and just seeing, you know, a lot of this stuff like the Digic processor and stuff is cool, but until you get it in your hands and see it, you know, you don't. It's hard to. It looks amazing. I'm sure the R1 was always an amazing autofocus system because of what it's designed for. But it's you know, looking at this and seeing it for obviously the excitement, the hype versus the reality of getting in your hands and seeing how it reacts right now too.
Yeah, and their coverage is a little bit different than other camera companies, because normally if we're doing Fuji or Sony or Nikon, they're going bam, bam, bam with all those specs. Canon's taking a little bit more time to go through and explain why it's important. And they're obviously talking about action priority now and why this is a big sports camera. So I really want to know, Graham and Dwayne, I really want to know your thoughts on what's coming through on the actual information from Canon.
To be honest, I think the biggest issue, and I've mentioned it already in the stream, you'll get sick of me talking about it, is 0.5 seconds pre-capture is just way too many. If you're a sports photographer and you're shooting at 40 frames per second, as soon as you hit that shutter, you're adding 20 shots straight away if you've got pre-capture turned on. Yeah. So it's just way too many. Most on Sony, on the A9 III, you can set that for 0.01. So you're only capturing a handful of images. You don't need to capture 20 images every time you push the shutter. We need to be able to choose what we want and be able to turn it off and on by a button would be ideal. So that's disappointing. But the new sensor is fantastic, because obviously the speed at which, because some of the issues with the slower sensors is when it's talking to the lens and it's obviously getting all these calculations, the autofocus can get confused and it can jump off and come forward. And obviously with the faster processor and sensor, it should mean that we don't get that autofocus hunting as much. So I'm excited to see how that performs.
Hopefully.
It's
and
Go ahead, Simon.
people are already reporting that they're having trouble logging into Preorder. So despite some of our reservations, this is shaping up to be very popular, because we saw the same thing with, what was it, the last camera that was announced? It was the Nikon Z6 Mark III. After 15 minutes was sold out, and people had trouble getting in. So James, go ahead, please.
I was just making a point because I'm watching the stream, the Canon stream, and a lot of people are like posting that they're upset that it's only 24 megapixels. But I'm like, to me, I'm like, this was kind of expected. The flagship line, and you guys that are in the photography know more, the flagship line has always prioritized speed. It's always been prioritizing speed and the ability to get any job done. And when you start adding more megapixels, that's a lot more processing power that requires a lot more extensive hardware needed. Whereas if you can keep it at a megapixel, that I think most people still 24 megapixels is enough. For some people, obviously, you for certain jobs you'll need more, but speed has always been the game of the game for like the R1 lineup. So, but I was just making a comments like there's a lot of people that are like going on Canon's stream that are not happy that it's only at 24 megapixels.
Well, let's hear what Graham has to say, because Graham shoots this day in and day out, and he's been quiet for a little while, so I want to bring him in here. And as he's talking, I want to show you guys some of the work that he actually has shot.
I think one of my biggest things that I'm waiting to see an improvement on is the R3 still overheats shooting at 120 frames, which is a bit of an issue, especially when you are in an outdoor environment. Well, granted, we don't shoot outdoors during the summer months here because it's just far too hot for the horses. But during the winter months, it still can get a little bit hot. And that the R3 shooting at 120 frames a second in 4K within, I'd say, a minute and a half, it does start with the overheat warning sign. And I've had it shut down on me a few times. So if there's an improvement on this, I will be very, very happy. Obviously, some of the other things that will be great is an improvement on the autofocus. I can't complain about the IBIS. All of my videos and photographs are shot handheld. The stability in the lenses and the cameras is absolutely incredible. So from that side of things, I'm really excited to get the camera in my hands, give it a good test. As far as more the personalized photo shoots, the portraiture, the wildlife, I'm very keen on the R5 Mark II. And I probably will use it as well for the sports photography, especially just trying to get some of those more unique shots where I do need to crop a little bit. And it'll be interesting to see again on the overheating issues with the high frame rate shooting. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting them in my hands.
Yeah, I can imagine how this can change things for you. And by the way, we kind of cursed over this just briefly. It's going to support Wi-Fi 6E. It's going to have 2.5 G base wired Ethernet. The 9.44 million EVF 0.9 magnification, that's been validated as well. Improved eye controlled autofocus, Digic-X accelerator, Digic-X processing, up to 40 frames per second, continuous shooting. And yeah, so not a lot of surprises here. But again, and this is where, if you look at this and you say 24 megapixels is disappointing, it's because it doesn't fit your workflow. When Nikon released the Z9, it kind of fed that rumor that was going around that Canon rumors had started about the R1 being the master of everything and a jack of all trades. And I think when it comes to sports and fast action photography, yes, that works. But I think the Nikon Z9, when it went to 45 megapixels, did 8K video up to 60 frames per second, it kind of shocked people because that's not what we expected from the D6, the D5. And then, of course, Sony released the Alpha 1, and it did 50 megapixels. So everybody was expecting, oh, Canon's going to do the same. But you got to keep in mind that for this type of group, and Graham has already said this, when it comes to that fast shutter, 2 milliseconds, much better low light performance, reduced noise. That's something that's very, very important. Again, showing you this one picture that Graham took of a horse. I mean, look at the lighting of this scene here. Look at how everything is sharp. This is in daylight. That's an incredible shot. And when I first saw this, I couldn't help but stare at it for a while. It almost seemed surreal. And I think that's really, really important.
I've just seen here, look, the R1 is not out on the Canon Middle East website yet, but there's another website and they've got the expected price at 23,851 dirhams, which is pretty much the price that the R3 was for sale at when it came out. So that's interesting.
Looks like the R1 is about 10,000 to 10,500 here in Australia. So it's expensive, but it could have been worse.
What was the price of the R3, Dwayne, when the R3 came out there?
I think it was 8.5.
Really? Okay. Well, it's interesting because, as I say, when the R3 came out there, they had prices of about 23,000 dirhams. But here, the expected price for the R1 is 23,851. Look, I think we're very lucky in this country when it comes to taxation and that side of things. We're very blessed. We can really get very good deals. But it's going to be very interesting to see when the official price comes out. As far as I hear, it's going to be very similar to the last like the R5 was, R5 similar price for the R5 Mark II.
All right, so starting to talk about the R5. I pre-ordered my camera. I'm actually trying to get you guys Canadian pricing, but it's as though that Canada's still asleep. 6 o'clock here in the morning. I don't have any pricing from Henry's or Downtown Camera, so we'll just have to wait and see. But I expect it to be, well, not cheap. So the R5, this action priority mode, I'm really curious to know how this works. To be able to stay focused on the person with the ball.
That's something that's always confused me a little bit, and where we're going with AI is the cameras should be smart enough to be able to tell if the subject's in the frame or not. So with wildlife, with birds, my frustration is once it locks onto the bird, the camera should be smart enough to know that to stay on it, because sometimes it'll go to a branch or it'll go to grass. It should know, well, a branch or a grass is not a bird. So I'm hoping they've improved the AI to train it to better recognize subjects and stick to subjects. That's what I'm hoping.
Wow.
Someone is asking which one would be better for underwater use, the R1 or the R5 Mark II. I would love to hear you guys, but I have a feeling the R1 might be better.
You mean intentional or accidental?
Intentional, like with underwater housing.
Well, have you seen the price of those underwater houses that go on the cameras? I think the to put an R1 in is going to be, there's a lot of camera that you've got to cover up. So I think an R5 would make better sense as far as ease and ability. But
another website has crashed. So for those of us, and I knew it was going to sell well, but I wasn't sure how well. And normally it's just the US that's crashing, but Canon UK website is down.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, Canon are struggling to keep up, like the RF 200 to 800, which I have back here. I mean, that's been on pre-order for some people for months and months, even half a year. So I hope they've got their production sorted out so that people don't have to wait, because Nikon was pretty bad. There's nothing worse than pre-ordering a camera and having to wait 6 months to a year to get it.
And New Zealand price is $72.99, Dwayne. I'm thinking of retiring to New Zealand. I keep forgetting to give them a call because I live there and I don't know if I don't know what my status is. My parents dragged me away to Canada when I was young. But I'm interested in retiring because it's either Vancouver or someplace similar. New Zealand is kind of very similar. One thing I want to talk about weather sealing, guys. I want to show you something briefly that I took this past weekend when I was in Niagara Falls. That's not
Beautiful.
it there. Let's try
Oh,
here.
No.
it's a
I want to
roller.
show you, this is the Canon EOS R5 Mark I. Look at this here. You can see this camera is not protected. I had the 24-105 f4 on it, and it gets even tougher than that. This is what it's like when you're right at the base of Niagara Falls. Look at that rain coming in. It's coming in sideways. You've got it's intense. You don't realize how intense it is. Looking at some of these photos, it looks like it's just a light mist, but no, it's hitting you hard. I also talked to a friend of mine, Vic, who dropped his camera in the ocean. A wave hit him when he was taking some portrait photography, surprised him. The camera was immersed, salt water, and everything is fine. So these cameras can do well with weather sealing. They're talking about Canon Log 3. I'm waiting to see if they do Canon Log 2, guys. Look at that. Canon Log 2, Canon Log 3 confirmed. Canon Rumors has always been very good with their information. Pre-record capture up to 5 seconds of video before you press the record button. I think a firmware update might give us more than a half a second with stills. I mean, it sounds too arbitrary. I do like that action priority mode. Dwayne, what you were saying earlier, something that I've been saying this all along. I don't want a faster autofocus system. I want an autofocus system that thinks like me. I don't care if there's 100 people in the scene. If I'm looking at my son, and the ability to register people, I think will make a huge difference, because we want to increase the hit rate. We want to reduce the level of effort into our workflow, and I think that alone, a $300 difference, who cares if it can save us time and money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And these camera companies are improving it. I spoke to the head of Sony, and they're saying that they're training the AI. I mean, we can see it in phones. Phones are very good, so there's no reason why our cameras can't get as smart in detecting subjects. And I'm sure that's where it will go. It'll get to a point where you say, that's what I want. Stay on that. I don't want it going anywhere else. And it's pretty good at the moment anyway. Once it does find it, it does stick pretty well. But at the acquisition stage, it still can be problematic, especially if it goes to branches. So I still use spot autofocus a lot of the time to guide the autofocus if it gets confused before changing to eye tracking. So it'll be interesting to see if these have improved that.
Yep.
I was in a camera store the other day, and I happened to be looking at the those PTF those cameras that you put up and they follow people.
Yes.
And again, the AI, they said that the one that they showed me, you can select a particular person, and even in a group of 50, it will pick up that person and follow them. So I think it's no doubt this is where our cameras are going. But then again, there's no ways I can use it in my environment, because if I've got 40 riders coming into an arena, sort of one after the other, and they pass by one of the other riders that we put into my, told to focus on, who's standing outside the arena watching, now suddenly so again, it depends on their situation. It depends what you're shooting.
100%.
Simon, I'm actually on B&H's website reading the specs. This may be huge in terms of video. They're putting out on their spec sheet that the video recording in RAW is 14-bit.
Yeah, I've got that on the screen right now.
Yeah,
you and I are thinking alike.
Which is, if that will, I would say this right now. If that is true, again, I haven't heard anybody else bring this up. Like I didn't see Jordan. I was looking at B&H video. I didn't even see them bring it up there. But if that is true, that the internal RAW is 14-bit, then this camera is definitely going to be, with that C-Log 2, potentially very much worth it. Looking at it's like you got 14-bit RAW, then you got the H.264, you got XF AVC, and then you've also got the XF HEVC as well, which is interesting. So no ProRes, which I did. I think that was reaching. I didn't expect that to happen, but XF AVC, seeing that compared to the original R5. Those are very huge improvements, because those are codecs that are very well established, in terms of Canon's cameras. So seeing that in their hybrid camera, I think a lot of R5Cs are about to flood the third party, the the third party sellers market.
I'm disappointed here, though. CF Express still has is not supporting extended card sizes, so my 4 terabytes still will only give me 2 terabytes. I'm curious, though. The R1. Let's take a look at the R1. Does the R1 give us support for a larger card with? I was going to say Chat GPT, but no, it's GPT, which is the. See, it's still early. I'm still having trouble. I'm not even going to wake up. I'll just go to bed after.
While you're looking at that, Simon, I am a little annoyed that there's still an SD card in the R5 II. Like, I know people have a lot of SD cards, but it's, the CF Express is so much faster. I mean, I haven't used SD cards for a long, long time. So I would have preferred 2, but I understand why they have 1. But
yeah, and here it doesn't mention whether there's a limitation or not. It is frustrating because what I find with the R5 is I'm always dual recording, whether it's stills or video. Whenever I go to 4K 120, guess what? I have to go in, I have to turn it off, and then I have to remember to go back in. But yeah, and it's frustrating because it's not because I'm going to go to the R1 for dual CF Express, because I don't get the other things that I need. Frustrating. I know we had hoped, but look, let's understand what we got. We got 14-bit RAW here. We've got a much improved autofocus system, which a lot of people were unhappy with, especially when the R3 came out. We've got a full-size HDMI port. Just pause on that one for a moment. We've also got...
Wayne is saying on their Canon's website it's 12-bit RAW, not 14. So it may be a typo on B&H.
Well, the R1 says 12-bit, because I was just highlighting that. If you look at the R1, it's 12-bit RAW.
Well, yeah, that leads me to think it's a typo, probably. But I don't know.
Let's see what else here.
Yeah, I am personally shocked. I know it's just the fact that we had that dual base 800 and 3200 ISO and video mode on the R5C, and we don't have that here on the R5. That is an incredibly useful thing. It's such a practical ISO of 3200 for using video. Now, the R5 does have an unofficial, in my opinion, 3200 base ISO too. But I am personally that we don't see anything about a dual base ISO for video in the R5, seeing that it is such a video workhorse type camera.
Do you think that could potentially come with a firmware update?
Yeah.
Ryan, do you think that could potentially come with a firmware update later on?
That's not something I've ever heard. It could, but that's not something you typically hear about. And I've never seen a firmware update where they've changed a dual base ISO. That's not saying that it can't. The one thing I will say about Canon is Canon has been, especially in the R5, but even in the R5C, they've been very, very good at taking these cameras and really giving us really solid firmware updates. So that could be something. I'm just personally shocked as video centric as the R5 has been. That is such a, you use it on almost every shoot you go on. I know I do on the R5 too. The R5C, I'm just really surprised there's not dual base ISO.
Yeah, we'll have to see with the camera, because unless dual base ISO, I mean, it basically insinuates that there's 2 circuits in the camera. If there isn't 2 circuits in the camera, I don't know how it can be activated via software update. So again, we'll see once people get in their hands if there's like a hidden like second circuit that cleans up a higher ISO base. Personally, I prefer just I've worked with the C70 a long time. I like sticking with 800 and below because if you want to get cleaner blacks, you want to shoot at lower ISOs anyway, and then add lights. Obviously, you can't do that for every single situation, and you got to work with the environments that you have. But I've always just done my best with the preferred methods when it comes to video, of just shooting at the base ISO of like 800 or 400.
I can't shoot at a low ISO when it comes to my situation, because I'm shooting in low light situations and I got fast action. So I'm completely, it just doesn't work for me. So that's where it falls short for my situation.
Absolutely. And everybody's is different. Like even in low lights, like I shoot weddings at like 800 ISO or like 640 ISO. I've just have either uh, I have my aperture open up, or I have additional lights, or I just find ways of using the environment that I have. And there, because these cameras, at least for video, obviously the stills development process, and obviously everybody's development is different, but in terms of video, these cameras have a lot more. There's a lot more flexibility of these cameras, especially when you get, powerhouse and at least like DaVinci Resolve. They can pull a lot out of these cameras, and you can get a lot of use out of them. It's just about knowing the scene.
Yeah, I think the big thing is, especially where that dual base really comes into play, at least for me, is if you're doing a lot of frame rate playing. So for instance, this camera can shoot 240 frames a second, which is actually really exciting, right? But you got to really crank up the shutter for that. And that's where a dual base ISO is really going to come into effect. It's going to be really hard to shoot a 180-degree shutter at 240 frames a second at an 800 ISO unless you're really pumping some light in there. So it's just a flexibility thing that's nice to have. And but I'm really excited about that 240 frames per second. I think that's something that will be used a lot
Right.
because it is such a fun.
Isn't this the first Canon camera to actually allow 240 frames a second?
It's
I don't
saying on this, it's saying on the specs here that it'll do 1920 by 1080 by 240, which we'll see. But it also says raw 14 bits. I don't know if that's completely accurate too. B&H site right now in the spec saying, it does say, if you go to the internal recording modes, it does say you can do 1920 at up to 240 frames a second. So I guess that's to be verified, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
there's quite a few.
I think because I saw B&H's video, they and Petapixels, they do confirm there is 240 frames a second in 1080. Which again, I think this is the first Canon camera that actually allows you to do in 1080 at least 240 frames a second.
Yeah, and that's such a fun frame rate to have. That's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. I'm just trying to, as comments are going by, I'm trying to validate from Adorama's site if it has 12-bit or 14-bit. But yeah, 240 frames per second, I'm really excited by that. I'm excited by the improvements to the autofocus system, the amount of times where I was shooting stuff, because to give you an idea of one of the things I do, this is one thing I can share because it's my own stuff. Bring it up again. Is every year I like to kind of capture, a day in the life and go through various parts of the year. And, it's also a way for me to capture B-roll. So this is a good example of shooting with a 200 to 800 millimeter at night with a 2x extender. And it just produces really incredible stuff. But it's also a way for me to, like my wife learned to make me rice bread because I've really developed quite an allergy. And so I thought, well, I'll capture this too. And this was shooting with a 50 millimeter f1.2. And, it turned out quite well. I just love capturing life as it is. And to have that 240 frames per second just allows me to do things that I couldn't do before. When I was shooting, again, I go back to the falls here. I was shooting this in 4K at 120 frames per second. And I wish I could have slowed it down a little bit more. Really, really incredible opportunity. The ability to go to an f29, and people will say, no, the sharpness is gone. When you're shooting slow motion, when you're shooting 4K 120, motion blur is going to be a part of things, especially for video. And I was pretty happy with the detail, the level of clarity, the color, and this was all shot with Canon Log 3 on the Mark I. And I was very, very impressed with it. And I'm trying to skip through this stuff here to get to the falls, because when you get that the exposure correct, when you can slow things down and to capture the moment a bit more, the power is absolutely incredible here. I never realized the falls was this color because it's happening so fast. You got the bright sun in your eyes, but the camera allowed me to slow things down. And I thought, this is not right. I had to go back to the falls the following week to double check, and I actually paid more attention with my own eyes, and I realized, yeah, this is the color of the water as it goes across. But it was 4K 120 that really allowed me to capture that and to be able to do that. And so having that 240 is another level of excitement. And Graham, when you're, I don't know if they are Does the R1 have 240 frames per second in any mode?
Yeah.
What do you think of that, Graham? 240 frames per second.
I mean, look, as I say, I prefer shooting at a higher quality. So we'll see. We'll see how that performs. Because when you're shooting at 240, you're down at 2K, isn't it?
It's 2K,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is social media based. So it's people that are wanting content to be able to post on social media, post on Instagram, TikTok. So we'll see. The quality, you can get away with stuff like that. But what I'm not, too impressed with is for the R5 Mark II is that video photograph, the stills video switch on the left side. That's going to drive me totally insane. That's the nice thing with the R3 is having that ability to literally just just switch that between with my right hand. There's no need to start moving hands around because often the other hand is on the lens, so it's so quick. So that I'm not impressed with. And the other thing Canon needs to sort out, especially for the R1, because there's a problem with the R3, is the eye cups. Drive me up the wall. The number of people that I see that either the eye cup is breaking or falling off. I found a little trick by putting a large elastic band around the eye cup, and this has now kept my eyepieces in place and stopped them from breaking now for the past couple of months of hectic work. But they need to sort that out, and the supply of trying to get replacements is ridiculous. So that's something they need to sort out. But as I say, I want to get the cameras in my hands and really test them out.
Yeah,
Just a couple of things, Simon, a couple of questions there. I don't know if there's any comment on GPS and the R5 II. The other question is on the grip of the R5 II. Have they moved where the joystick was? Because on the original R5, if you've got the battery grip, it was in a really weird position. So I don't know if they've changed the button layout on the grip. I don't know if it shows on any of the pictures where the buttons are on the grip for the R5 II. The other thing that people have noticed is that Canon still haven't upgraded. I know the film people don't use it, but Sony and Nikon now have a much better LCD that comes out. It's variable tilt, whereas Canon is still sticking to their original screen by the looks of it.
Yeah, the A7 R5 has an incredible LCD. I wish that was on the R5.
The A9 III is the same now too. They use the same one. And someone asked about illuminated buttons or not. If it has that. We can't seem to see any buttons on the grip there though, can we? No photos. But yeah, it's strange, Graham, why they've done that with the video. Because I mean, the old 5D 5.4 that had the video on the right hand side as well, and the R3 has it, so it is odd why they've done that. Yeah,
and I was still hoping as well, because obviously the video switch is for when you're shooting portrait, but now suddenly a lot of video reels are now in when you're shooting landscape. Now all the video reels are in portrait. If they had the switch in another section here to be able another spot to be able to switch instead of having to change your hand position, would have been fantastic. And I still thought, okay, maybe that's something that I'll bring in with the R1, but it doesn't look like they have. But
and the other issue, I don't know if you've ever struck this, but on Canon, if you're shooting stills and the buffer's getting full when you switch to video, you can't start recording video until the buffer clears.
Drives me up the wall as well, so, because you're trying to shoot a horse over a jump in photographs, and the next jump's coming up and you want to catch that in video, and you've got to now wait. Although the R3 is pretty good, it has got a very good buffer, but it's still something I do run into. And then of course you end up doing that typical thing where you hit record thinking you've done it and there's so much action happening, and then you stop, and when you stop you're actually pressing record, and then you screw up your entire round. So
yeah, 100%. That's one thing Nikon have done well. Nikon just lets you switch straight away. You can just go still to video instantly and start recording. There seems to be an issue on Canon with their writing ability with the buffer. Having that hard buffer is just so annoying. I don't know why Canon can't fix that. It must be something inherent in their bodies that they can't get away from a hard buffer. But so that's disappointing.
Yeah.
Something I still actually mentioned to the guys at Canon a while back when there was the talk of the R1. I said, can you not put some form of an audible sound in that notifies you when you press record? Because that would make my life so much easier, because there's not always time to look at your settings, see if you pressed record, but to have that audio sound come through that, okay, it's recording. But I suppose later, well, you never know. But that's a pet peeve of mine. Absolute pet
Yeah.
peeve of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks to everybody using my links. It's very much appreciated. I just lost my thought of what I wanted to say now.
I think
yes.
the big question.
Sorry, it's right on the screen. The battery grips, we only see 2 of the battery grips. We don't see the one that's supposed to have, quote, active cooling. But we have the BG-R20, the BG-R-EP, which is the one with the Ethernet port, $349 for the basic one, $499 with the Ethernet port, and the active cooling. Well,
It's going to be $400.
really?
Yeah, the active cooling is going to be $400.
Well, I'll get one of those
Okay.
then. I don't know if I need it.
For me, the real question after seeing these specs and now coming on B&H and seeing the going down is this the $299 camera, right? Are these specs enough to put away your R5C or your R5-1? I mean, I think that's when the only thing I've seen here that for me personally on a professional level that's going to make a difference is I will be honest, 240 frames a second. I can see commercial applications for that, especially for social media and stuff for some of my clients. I think that is really intriguing. The real question comes down, are the rest of these enough to really, because the R5 is still such a great camera, right? And honestly, looking at this without getting my hands on the camera, I'm still a little torn. Is this enough for an upgrade or not? And I think Simon, you said it pretty well. A lot of these things are on paper. They're different when you get them in your hand and actually see how they're implemented. And I think that's a lot of what I feel is going to be the final verdict for me on this R5 Mark II is when you get it in your hands, are you going to really notice that generational jump, or is it just, subtle changes?
Once I'm done here, I'm going to go back to bed. And then I'm going to take a look at a lot of the review videos on my TV while I'm drifting off into Neverland. I really want to hear what Jordan Drake has to say. I always like to follow what he says from the video point of view. But I want to take a look at a lot of the channels and see what they have to say, because I will be getting this camera in late August, apparently. And I want to have an idea of what to expect. I get a sense that the autofocus system, I'm going to be very happy with it, because the amount of times, it didn't happen often, but the amount of times where it broke autofocus, and it was if you've got children and you're shooting the little guys, it's like herding cats. And when there's a whole bunch of them around, that's where I had problems with the autofocus falling. Outside of that, it wasn't a problem. But for those situations, that active priority mode, that's kind of a big deal. With the new chip processing elements, am I going to be able to do 4K HQ past 30 frames per second? That's something that isn't evident to me here. What about oversampled 4K? Sorry, I should say 8K oversampled 4K. I haven't seen anything about that yet. And I don't know if anybody has any information. If you've seen anything, James, Brian, Graham, Dwayne, if you've seen anything about that, because a 4K HQ mode was limited to 30 frames per second. Getting more detail would matter to me. But
no one, every video I've watched, no one has brought up that the 4K is oversampling. And I was just watching Pro AV TV's video, and they didn't mention it, but I'm kind of with Brian. It almost feels like it's just there where it's potentially worth it. You got the addition of Canon Log 2. The 240 frames per second to me, that is going to be the big thing in terms of compared to previous cameras. That's going to be those two things are probably going to be the big thing for. for most people that may be shooting on R5Cs or even the original R5, because I mean, I don't, even though AK60 is
wrong camera.
great. I don't. I honestly, when for average shooters, for terms of video shooters, average video shooters, I don't see a lot of them using for the AK60 because it's so much. It is a lot of data that you're
Yeah.
going to be going through, um, and, it's going to be expensive for your clients as well, in terms of just data storage. I do see people obviously using 4K 60, 4K. The fact that it can do 4K 120, but you had all that with the previous R5. So the additional log tool, we'll see how it handles how this new sensor handles it. But really, I agree with Brian.
Oh, record limit. I found it.
Yeah.
It's not 30 minutes. It's not 6 hours like the R3, but it's 2. And I'd love to hear some of the other cinematographers in the room comment, but as far as I'm concerned, 2 hours is, well, you'd be lucky to get that on a single battery anyway. To me, 2 hours is kind of unlimited because the amount of times you're going to need more than 2 hours. And where we're streaming here, I could do 4 or 5 hours because streaming is not limited. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't see a scenario where Ron, we can't do 8K in 2 hours. Well,
that's 4K in 2 hours. It doesn't mention 8K.
Yeah. So 8K in 4K in 2 hours. Maybe there's some conferences where you got to film and you have to have your record for your backup nonstop. That could potentially be problematic. But in terms of us, we're shooting maybe 2-3 minutes tops of recording continuously. Then we'll stop recording in terms of filmmaking. And then in terms of vlogs, I may be recording 45 minutes at best, maybe an hour top. I think an hour is like the most of it. So 2 hours is more than enough for, like, in my personal opinion, in terms of video, like 95% of scenarios, it's more than enough.
Yeah. I would have to hold with James. I mean, I know as an R5 user, I really, the 30-minute record limit is something that just is hands down top 3 weakest parts of the Canon R5. Is an absolute limitation. It's so arbitrary and pointless. And you run into it, especially if you do a lot of interviews, when you're interviewing clients or you're doing video like blogs and stuff like that. So I think that 120-minute limit, that is great personally. I think that's realistic. I definitely can see it's for 50 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes. But I don't see 120 minutes. That's 2 hours. That's going to be realistic. You're probably going to take a break, or you can clip at some point, and it's a fan number to hit. I think that's very, very practical for the most part, unless you're doing like live events, maybe where you have to put up a camera and forget about it. But for the most part,
Brian's frozen there. Dwayne, we just got Canadian pricing, $58.99, although there's a pre-order rebate of $500 and a Canon EOS system jacket. So if we do the math, it's $6,600 after tax in Ontario for the camera, and if you take into account that discount, it's about $6,100. So definitely the rebate puts it in the same price point as the Mark I. And I'm curious to see what jacket they have. So 10 o'clock, I'll be calling my local camera store and saying, hey, make sure you get me that jacket. And do I get that $500 rebate plus whatever discount? Sharpen your pencil. I'm curious to see what we can do here, if I can get it for the same price as the previous one. So not as bad. Now, some people are saying that the time limit is for 100, 120. Well, if you read it here, it says record limit up to 120 frames per second in 4K. So what does that mean? Well, that means if you're shooting in 4K, there's a time limit, and best case scenario, you've got 2 hours. If you go 100, 120, it's probably going to be less. As far as 2K, I don't know. It doesn't say. It only refers to the record limit being in 4K. We could assume, well, okay, if it's in 2K, no record limit, right? Well, no, because we could also assume by that same logic that there's no record limit in 8K, and I don't buy that either. So
Oh, the record limit is 8K, only being able to fill up a card in like 30 minutes. But someone was asking, like, I know some people are asking if like the cooling grip is essential for video. I don't think it's essential, but I think if you're in certain scenarios, you may want to invest. It's $400, and obviously for some people that may be a lot of money. This may be a good investment. If no matter what camera you have, in certain environments, if you're in hot environments, the camera is going to the cameras are going to overheat, especially if you're dealing with cameras with smaller bodies. Fans or not, the fans will help and keep it going. So if you can get the cooling thing are going to help. You having a camera that doesn't have a coolant, no matter how good the cooling system is, it's going to eventually, in certain hot scenarios, you'll reach a point. It's just physics. So I would say if you're working, especially now, because I don't know how it's been for you, Simon. Here in Pennsylvania, in the U.S., these heat waves have been killing
my
us
God.
for the past like 6 weeks. So
Niagara Falls, I just showed you that B-roll earlier. That was this weekend, and it was funny because I was there with my wife to see a magic show. I had friends from Tennessee and friends from Ohio. It was around 86 degrees and humid, and I hated it. I was so happy to go on the boat because it was cool and in the power station. But, the weather is horrible, and I'm so happy with firmware 1.6 for the R5. So going back to that question people asked, is the R5, if you're actually asking this question, is the R5 II worth $1,400 over the Mark I? Well, maybe it isn't to you. Definitely watch the reviews. I mean, I'd highly recommend pre-ordering. You've got till August the 20th. Pre-order if you're unsure. Do your homework. You can always cancel. And I would cancel before, let's say, August the 1st or 7th, because that August the 20th date, they'll probably hit it a little bit sooner. Pre-order, so that way you're in the queue. It's selling out. I can see from pre-order already. I see 95 on one of my sources here. So it is selling very, very well. It is going to sell out. And then do your homework. I can't comment. I can't recommend because I don't know what value you're looking for. But I would completely ignore the specifications. And what I would focus on is the value chain of your business or your hobby. What capabilities are you looking for? What do you need? And then look at the two cameras and see where one is better than the other. From doing this channel for 5 years, and I'd really love to hear Graham and others comment, but one of the things I keep hearing more and more is the ability to increase your hit rate for stills. So if you're shooting 20 frames per second, 40 frames per second, 30 frames per second, or 5 frames per second, what percentage of those shots are in focus, exposed properly? Same for video. And then outside of that, how does it improve your workflow? If you're making money out of it, it's a different question, and you've got probably a larger budget. If you're not making money out of it, then it's your hobby. So what does this camera do differently? Because $42.99 versus $28.99 is a mammoth difference. And the R5 Mark I isn't a crappy camera. All that excitement over it when it came out, today it's better with firmware 1.6. That overheating is gone. The autofocus system is pretty good. The new one is definitely going to be better. It's definitely got an improved sensor. That stack sensor is going to help you in photography. I can't tell you which one to get. And I even suggest taking a look at the Nikon Z8 as well. It's another really good camera. It offers many of the same capabilities as the R5, although I'd assume the R5 will have a slightly better autofocus system. Nikon has still been playing catch up. But
Simon, I'll just Pro AV TV is confirming there is false color in both the R1 and the R5 Mark II.
Fantastic.
Where's my pen? I'm going to drop my pen. This is a mic drop moment. I mean, I shoot with a Ninja 5 when I'm shooting in the studio downstairs because of one thing. I have the false colors, I have the exposure tools, but I also have, wait for it, Apple ProRes. So I'm not seeing Apple ProRes anywhere here. Everybody's doing Apple ProRes, but Canon. Could that be a firmware update? What do you think Canon doesn't do Apple ProRes? And I know this is a video-centric question, but why?
I think
I mean,
I think that's a licensing question more than a technology thing,
I
from
think
what I've understood.
it's a bit of both, I believe, because one, Apple ProRes is intensively power consuming. It's actually more power consuming than the 8K RAW that's in the R5. Um, so it's one of the reasons why Blackmagic's cameras batteries do not last long. At least the older Blackmagic cameras. The newer ones last longer, but they don't have ProRes in there. They have Blackmagic RAW. Um, there was something I believe Photo Joseph brought up like years ago that is like it's a very process intensive codec. There's also the licensing thing, but my guess is the fact that given the body size, given the licenses, but also given the fact that they know, you know, they're in terms of battery life, they want to try to give as much power and much longevity in terms of power for the user that ProRes may just not be worth it, and they feel their XF AVC codecs, they're also all interim. Which, by the way, they have all I XF AVC in the R5 2 at least. I believe it's also in the R1, but it's an all I codec as well. So they probably looking at it. We don't really need Apple ProRes because our XAVC codec is accepted pretty much in all the NLEs, and just like Apple ProRes.
Yeah, I think, Simon, I thought your question was a fantastic question personally, because talking about, is this a camera to upgrade? And I think there is. I'm going to make this statement having not touched the R5 II and knowing exactly what it does, but based on this first impression, I would say if you're a hobbyist, if you're someone that's looking for a great camera that you can use for several years, my personal opinion here is the R5 I is still a terrific camera that will still be relevant for several more years. I would almost say if you're a hobbyist and you're not making money from this and doing it, I would wait, because there's going to be an R5 III some point down the road in a couple years, and that'll probably have features that are going to justify that extra cost difference. I think if you're someone that's using the R5 for commercial work, and you need a camera, the fact that now it's got kind of a Cinema OS language, maybe a nice B, it could be a good B camera for C300s, other things like that. I still don't know if it's better than an R5C. I'll be honest, if you're in an ecosystem with C70, C300s.
Well, those codecs, those record modes are so much more, there's so much more there.
So it's a great question, and I think I just don't I don't know. I mean, for me, the requirement movement is going to be something that I think would be enough because of what I record. But if you're a hobbyist, I don't know, man. I think the R5 is still such a great camera. That's a really, really tough question.
Well, I brought up this video here because I wanted to show you something. This is the R5 Mark I. This is dynamic range, and if you're familiar with snow, especially freshly fallen snow, it's a huge challenge because it's so bright. It's so easy to overexpose, even on a cloudy day in the north where we don't have a lot of light. And just take a look at how good it is able to pick up the detail, the color, the dynamic range. Even at the bottom of the hill here, when it shows you a larger view, you can see the portables, you can see the detail in the snow, and this is 4K, so you're not seeing the detail as much as, for example, you would be if you were looking on a big screen TV. This is all the Canon EOS R5 Mark I. This is handheld. This is not using any ND filters. It's not using any stabilization. This is built in. This is just me trying to get the shots. And I think from a video standpoint, it does an incredible job. And this was just me shooting. I go to a gym for rehab on my back, and I just wanted to try a few things. Try in low light. I chose the 50mm f1.2. The skin tones bang on. The colors in the background and that nice separation of the subject from the background just looked really, really good. And I was very impressed with it. And you just see the fall off from the bright lights to the shadows and how well it does. It is still a terrific camera. And again, here shooting outside. Again, I'm not using any internal ND filters. And one thing I started playing around with is I thought, okay, you know what? I know the rule of 180. And I started going, I'm going to bump that up. I'm going to go to 120, 240, and played around with it a little bit. And if you find out these rules are there for a reason, you start playing around a little bit. And you realize if you're not having a lot of fast moving subjects, then you can break that rule of 180 and get really good results. But I think Graham had said this earlier. If you want really good results, where it really matters the most, is not so much the camera body itself, but the type of glass you put onto it. Getting really good glass makes a huge difference and allows you to get the detail, allows you to capture things and make them look really, really terrific. So that's kind of me going on my rant. Oh, and I got to show you our cute little dog here, because I know Dwayne was showing his cat earlier. This is our little guy. This is Kofi. And this is, again, 4K 120. And I think I was using the rule of 180, Canon log 3. Almost everything I shoot is Canon log 3. This was using a gimbal. I think it was the Crane or the Weeble. I can't remember. But I find that 4K 120 is such an incredible tool, guys, for capturing the moment and slowing things down. I'm going to shut up now. I'm starting to get emotional about this.
Yeah, no, and just quickly regarding glass, yes, glass is like, as much as all these features are with the Canon, the glass is like, will give more determination to what your image will look like. But that also doesn't mean it needs to be the sharpest and the cleanest. It can be, you can dirty up your image if you want to, because sometimes with the way all these cameras are able to process things so cleanly now, I kind of sometimes want a lens to just dirty it up and just give it some more of organic and lighten it up a little feel. At the end of the day, it's all about learning, and it's about educating yourself on the different aspects. What if you're doing stills or where you're doing photography? It's just educating yourself and finding the proper tools that help with your creativity, with your artistic vision, and whatever you do, if you do this for a business. But Brian, this is not a hobbyist camera. Neither one of these are hobbyist cameras. These are both professional cameras.
No, okay,
true.
I got to jump in. I'm sorry, and I want Graham to back me up on this. First of all, there's no such thing as official or professional. To me, it's, are you using it to make money? Is it part of your living? Or are you doing it because you just enjoy it? I'm getting ready for retirement. And at first I was talking to my wife about getting a Corvette. I had pre-ordered one. Channel was going well, and that was my plan. And then I backed out of it because why? Well, I wanted to move to Vancouver. And part of that process was, as soon as I went from a $100,000 car down to a $6,000 camera, the conversation changed. And it's all about perspective. As you're moving into retirement, if you're looking for something to occupy your time, a camera is a great way of doing it. Go for a walk, go to a store, take your camera with you, because you never know when you're going to see something. I'm one of those guys who will have the camera around his neck, walking around town, just going to the grocery store, because you never know when that event is going to happen. I think, I was talking to Canon sales rep dealing with corporate sales, and he said, I don't understand it, referring to the Mark I, but most of the sales are not coming from corporate customers. They're coming from hobbyists, I think was the term he used. So the emotional aspect of being able to create content for your own personal consumption, for your own personal journey, I think is huge, Graham. What do you think?
Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Go for it, Brian.
Like, for me, if I see one thing about this, and maybe it's just because, I think Jack could probably have a good perspective on this too, which is I feel like this camera release today, especially with the R5 II, I still feel it's a transitionary thing. I feel like is it going to be Sony? Is it going to be Nikon now that they've got the Red acquisition? Someone is going to put an internal ND in a mirrorless camera, and it's going to rock the industry. And honest, until we see that, I feel like the global shutter in the Sony was a really exciting idea, right? And the one thing I'm seeing here is we don't have dual base ISO. We don't have internal NDs, so I still feel like this camera it's a step forward, but I don't feel like think here that's like going to really transform. And I do feel if you're like a hobbyist or even if you're a commercial shooter and you want to save money to get better glass, maybe an R5 II is not right. Maybe you should get the R5 I and save that extra money to get a second piece of glass for it or start saving up and really just hold on. Because I think in 3 years, we're going to see, I think within the next 3 years, someone is going to be releasing a mirrorless body with internal NDs. And I think that is going to be a huge game changer in how you approach these content creation things. That's just kind of how I feel.
No, I think so.
Simon.
I think we need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Simon, all your R5 Mark I footage looks amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
Which is kind of a testament to say, well, man, the R5 Mark I is still plenty good. And to me, a lot of the Mark II new upgrades sound like incremental upgrades. I'm sure if I have it in hand, I might have a different perspective. But I think maybe the aim of this is to convert maybe either different brand shooters or maybe even Canon DSLR shooters. A lot of the wedding photographers I know still shoot on 5D Mark IVs. They still haven't made the transition to mirrorless. And maybe this is their gateway in rather than existing R5 Mark I users. It's like the iPhone S models, like you just need to upgrade your phones like every 2 years. And so maybe the fact we are a little bit put down by the not so revolutionary gains, it just means the pool of users from other brands will be a bigger tent. Yeah.
Graham, we keep cutting you off. Go ahead, Graham.
No, it's fine. What I keep wanting to bring up is that stupid saying, how long is a piece of string? It depends. What do you want to use the camera for? What are you doing? Yeah. It depends. For me, as an example, the reason I need to get an R5 Mark II if I'm going to use it for some of the photography, the fast action, is rolling shutter. The rolling shutter is terrible in the R5. R6 as well. All the jumps are leaning sideways. It looks like the course designer put up crooked jumps because you're moving incredibly fast as you're following the horse and panning through an arena. So and I know for wildlife as well, you end up with that warping at the end of. I love fast action bird photography so R5 Mark II with the backside illuminated stack sensor hopefully is going to address that issue. The low light capabilities, R5 is not that great. The R6 is better in low light capabilities for obvious reasons, but the R5 Mark II will hopefully be an improvement for low light capabilities as well. But again, it's a few small little changes to a new camera that are going to allow me to improve on the quality of what I'm doing. But is that something that everybody else is going to need? It depends. It depends what you're doing.
Yeah. And James said there's a patent pending, but I can also tell you through my patent coverage that Canon has several patent applications on internal ND filters, and I think those ended up in the C400. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just from a photo perspective, I'm definitely pre-ordering the R5 Mark II. Even though they're incremental updates, they are updates. So in Australia, I can't shoot video really on the R5 because it just overheats. So when it's hot outside and it's humid, it's impossible. It can even overheat in stills in Australia. So that's one huge thing. If you're in a hot environment and you're having overheating issues, then obviously the new camera will be much better. The ability to have pre-capture, a working pre-capture, that's massive for wildlife for certain people if you want to capture the moment before it happens. The R5, the original one, doesn't have it. This one has it. Obviously the rolling shutter will be massively reduced, which Graham was referencing. So if you've got hummingbirds or flying birds or fast action, we're going to see a bump and improvement there. 30 frames per second, obviously that's nicer than 20. Somebody's just put, we've got adjustable frame rates, which is great. Having an audible shutter will be nice for those of us that like to have an audible shutter. So I'm happy about that. The EVF is going to be much nicer. The R3 is great. So they are incremental, but for someone who uses their camera all the time, I'll appreciate all those upgrades. So I'm definitely pre-ordering, and it'll be good to get the camera, obviously, when we get it and compare it, because specs are one thing, but actually using a camera is the important part. How does it actually work in the field, and how does it improve our day-to-day use? So I'm excited, but I guess on the flip side, what everyone's mentioning, if your budget is, if you've got a budget, picking up the R5 second hand and an RF 100 to 500 or 200 800 is not a bad option as well.
And the other thing
Yeah.
too, with B&H and Adorama, the price is the price. However, reach out to your local camera store and just, there's no such thing as a non-haggle price. It's somebody will always say, no, that price is firm, but until you haggle. And in my experience, local camera stores, especially if you go to them on a regular basis and they see you support them, I don't know what the actual price that they pay for the camera versus the MSRP, but, give them a call, see if they sharpen the pencil. One thing with Patrick at Downtown Camera in Canada is the gentleman's always sharpened his pencil for me, and anybody who mentions my name when they purchase through him, he always does something, and that makes a huge difference. Dwayne, one of the things I was looking for in this camera, and I said I'd be perfectly happy with, the Mark I was a whole new camera, a whole new redesign. And there was many little growing pains with it. I would have been happy if the R5 Mark II was basically provided general improvements over the entire capabilities of the camera. And that's what I'm hoping to see. I hope that IBIS wobble is gone. The problem isn't with the technology. The problem is with the implementation of how the IBIS works. And what they could very simply do is as you start to move less than 35 millimeters, that's when it starts to be pronounced. And what they can do is they can dial back on the level of IBIS that is provided to avoid it. And it also tends to happen when it doesn't have a focus point locked. So I was going up a gondola, Grouse Mountain in Vancouver, and it was focused on the horizon. And it was shaking like it was bouncy and crazy and all that. And it was frustrating because I lost the footage. But I really do hope we see general improvements. But Jack, as a Nikon customer and Sony customer, what are you thinking? What's your final thoughts on this?
Yeah, so like a lot of the people who commented, I would have liked to see some new lens announcements as well. I'm sure that's in the works and they didn't want to take the spotlight away from the new cameras. I think for my use case, I would love some more fast primes across the range, maybe some f1.4 primes. I know the 35 f1.4 was just announced, although that lens had some, I guess, mixed reviews if you're a stills only shooter and don't like some of the compromises they've made in the design. But I think I think I'm going to wait, as Brian very, very wisely advised. I think I'm going to wait a little bit and see if this lineup of lenses that's going to come out will suit my use case. I'm going to sit pat for now. Yeah.
All right. As we get to the bottom end of this show, what I want to do is do a bit of a rapid fire. I'm going to pick on each one of my guests. I'm going to throw a question out there based on what you're asking in the audience. Keep in mind, we haven't reviewed these yet, so we might not have all the answers you're looking for. So this question here is worth an upgrade from the R6 Mark II for the 45 megapixels. Dwayne, you want to take that one?
For me personally, yes. For bird photography, I prefer 45. So for me, it's a no-brainer. If I had a choice and I had the funds, I'd be going with the 45 megapixels, mainly for birding and wildlife. It just helps you big time. I struggle to go back to 24 now after using 45. So I'd get 45.
All right. Somebody said here they'd be surprised if any local camera store actually offer any discounts. Well, I can tell you this. I got a discount on the R5 Mark I when it came out, and I know what you're thinking. And yes, Mark, that's because I've got a YouTube channel. Well, I only had 10,000 subscribers then, and one of my subscribers also went to Patrick at Downtown Camera, and guess what? He got a discount as well. Not as big as mine, but he got a discount. So here's the thing about negotiating. If you don't, you don't. But if you do, you might. All right, so let's take I'm looking for a question for Graham. I'm seeing a lot of video questions here, though. Taking a look. Okay, so here we go. Talking about the overheat. I've gotten the R3 to overheat and shut down shooting stills in California this summer. So, Graham, that's a problem. You're nodding. It's a problem you've dealt with the R3. If I remember correctly, I was looking at the news yesterday, and it got up to 62 degrees Celsius, 144 degrees Fahrenheit in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it depends in certain areas, but for the most part, during the summer months, we average about 45, 48. So we'll probably hit 50 a few times. We've already hit over 50 a few times. And I mean, I think any camera is going to struggle in that heat, but really, who the hell is going to be out shooting in that heat? It's, the animals are going to certainly be there. You know, it depends what you are shooting, but I think any camera is going to struggle. And I was chatting to one of my contacts with Canon back in South Africa, and they said that they had issues with the overheating with the R3 in stills when they were out shooting in the Kruger National Park. And I, touch wood, have not had any overheating issues with the R3 in stills, but only with the 120 frame 4K do I end up with that issue. So yeah, let's see if they address that issue with the R1. And but really, I don't even go out shooting. I what's the point? The birds are absolutely wilted and melted. The animals are not doing anything. So
I actually shot a wedding just last week in 110-degree weather. And we had to shoot outside because the ceremony was outside, and then they were there. This couple was very environmental friendly, so we had to get shots of them in the environment and by the water as well. Very much
they looked delightful with the makeup was melting and all sorts.
Yeah.
I've got a question here from Nathan, and I'm going to direct it to James. Do you think the new battery provides efficient power to the R5C as well?
I mean, I'm assuming he's talking about the battery grip. I don't know.
No,
I don't even know.
It's got a new higher powered battery. You might not have been here for that.
Okay.
And it is required for 8K. That's one of the caveats.
Okay.
It's required for 8K.
Well, we'll have to see if the R5C will even take it, or if it needs a firmware update to accept the battery power. So I don't know. It may be efficient. I don't know. I don't know. I think Brian shooting on the R5C would have better insight than me, but
No way.
I don't.
It won't make a difference because of the operating system on the Canon R5C. So what happens on the Canon R5C right now, your battery will deplete in video mode. You'll switch over to video mode. You still have 50% power. It's about how the Cinema OS is measuring the voltage. So what happens is it uses literally battery. So I don't think it's the Cinema it's what we talked about earlier. It's just the Cinema operating system is not designed for the mirrorless body, and Canon hasn't made any concessions for that. So I would personally be shocked. You may see a little improvement, but just based on how the Cinema OS works on the Canon R5C, I would personally be shocked if you saw a difference in the battery on here.
And Brian, another question for you from, it just went away, from Dominic asking, would you, video shooter, would you change your R5C so far? So based on what you've seen from the R5 Mark II, would you replace your R5C? Would you get the R5C? What are your thoughts?
That is an incredibly difficult question with the information that we have right now. I will be honest. If you have an R5C and you have to choose between these cameras, I would hold on to 5C personally. But that being said, it's all going to be situational. We really need to get our hands on this camera to see if there is a dual base ISO. We need to see how C-Log2 is actually implemented on the sensor. Things like that. Like, I just got to see, does this sensor really read C-Log2, or is it kind of, it says it, but it's terrible? You just got to see that. So I don't know. I mean, this is, I've been thinking about that whole time too. I don't know if this, one thing that I'd heard rumors is that this camera was going to basically replace the R5C.
Yes.
I don't feel that it does.
No, I don't
feel
either.
That it does. The pre-record is really awesome. The 240 frames per second in 1080 is really awesome too. But I don't know if this is something that I would say replaces the R5C.
One thing I want to say is, as we've I want to switch over to the specs. So one of the things when you have these reveals, it really helps validate some of the sources you have. And I want to take a look back at these leaked information. This is what I put out in the video last night or yesterday afternoon. From what I can see here, all of these have proven to be correct. Nothing is wrong. Same with the R1. The pricing was bang on. And, you know, it's a big thanks to my sources. People come forward. A lot of times it's through an anonymous email or it's an anonymous number, and it takes time to validate people. And this person has gotten things right time and time again, and it's very much appreciated. So thank you. If any of my sources are watching, thank you so much. But others, such as the one who said it's going to be, you know, as it's going to, more or less, you're going to want to replace the R5C with the R5 Mark II. Other sources, you know, not as accurate. And sometimes it takes, you have to learn the hard way. But I want to personally answer Donna's question about CF Express cards. When I first got the R5, I got a Pro Grade Cobalt 325 gigabyte for $700. And it had a maximum sustained write speed of around 1.4 gigabytes per second. There wasn't a lot on the market at the time, and that was one of the cheaper ones. SanDisk, which is what I was using for my my SD cards on the 70D, way more expensive. Then I started to reach out to companies I wanted to do reviews, and all but one of them reached out to me, and the first one was Angelbird. And you can see I've got a few of their cards here. There's a 4 terabyte, the 1 terabyte, a 330. I actually have one of their enterprise class SSDs with 100% over provisioned, which is what I edit off of. I have the AtomX in my Ninja 5, and I have micro and SD cards. And the reason for that is, as Graham will attest to, when you go into battle, when you're going to get all those shots, you don't care about what anybody pays you. You don't care about what anybody sends you. What you care about is reliability. And there's a lot of good brands out there, but as I did the review of the Angelbird, what really impressed me was how they report things. Nobody was telling you. They'd all say the max speed of reading and writing, but they wouldn't give you the sustained write speed, what you could peak at. And Angelbird was very clear. When I got the first card, it was 1 gigabyte per second sustained write. They've now bumped that up to the Mark IIs are now 1.3 gigabytes sustained write, and that's the slowest one. The fastest one, which is like the 330 gigabyte or the 660 or the 1.3, I believe, it has a maximum sustained write speed of 1.48 gigabytes per second. And the V90 cards, the V60 card has a maximum sustained write speed of around 140, 120, which is what most advertise for their V90, and their V90, I think, is 200 and something. So as I did enough of these reviews, I thought, well, okay, I use them day in and day out. I was reviewing the Preorder cards at the same time. And Preorder was a whole lot cheaper. It didn't give you the same throughput. It wasn't a tier 1 provider. And then Angelbird did something that shocked me. The prices for their cards, one of the lowest cost per gigabyte, to the point where I was doing a review of a Preorder and I said, hey, Angelbird's cheaper. How do you figure? And they were confused. So what I did over time is I started to standardize on Angelbird. Now, that's not to say ProGrade doesn't make great cards. It doesn't mean that others don't make great cards. But what I like about them is they actually design, engineer, build, fabricate on their same campus in Austria. They don't outsource to anybody else. And so that's who I use. Graham, can you tell us your thoughts and feelings on storage? Because I think storage is still expensive, but...
Yeah. I have used Angelbird. I've got a couple that I use. I've had one of their cards fail on me, which I wasn't too impressed about. So I do still tend to use more the CF Express. Which one is it? Let me just see. Give me 2 seconds. I'll tell you now.
I'm not the only one walking away.
Yeah, SanDisk is the one that I use quite a lot of. I use a combination. I'm very impressed by the price range of the Angelbirds, which is really great. So if somebody's on a bit of a tighter budget, but they still want something that is really good, has a decent read speed, then definitely the Angelbird. But as I say, I've stuck to the SanDisk for most of my cards. And I also don't. I steer away from getting the higher memory cards like 1 TB or up, because if something goes wrong with the card and you've suddenly shot a whole lot of footage on it,
Dual recording.
That scares. Hey,
dual recording. And when you get back to the hotel, always offload it.
Just remember, again, in an environment where you are shooting huge amounts of data, it's to have all that extra stress of dual recording. And yes, you've got, I think for a wedding where it's like a vitally important, hopefully you're not going to have another wedding, but you know what, a rider, they can have another round. So, but I do prefer to stick to the 512s or 256, depending on what it is. And those will last me ideally for a class.
And that's
Shoot
a good
the class,
point.
get it off.
I also want to let people know something to think about as well, because see, me and Graham live in different worlds. And when I go out, to me, a small card is 1 TB. Reason being, I shoot a lot of 4K 120. I'm shooting all I, or I'm shooting raw, and you find out that 1 TB is 512 just isn't enough, especially if you shoot any 8K. But you want to think about the storage size and capacity. But here we are, we've just hit 7:30 or almost 7:30 local time here. What I want to do, because I love having everybody here, but I want to free up the rest of your day. But I want to say thank you to you, first of all, at home. I was just looking at some of my analytic data here, and from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, I had 7,300 views. That's the most ever on any hour of the day. Yesterday, I got 40,000 views, and over the last 48 hours, 78,000 views. I've never received that level of traffic. Thank you, because if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here. And I wouldn't be able to attract so many incredible guests. Dwayne Patton from Australia, Jack Wang from Australia, Graham from the UAE, James from the United States, and Brian from the United States. If they, in any way thought this was, a bit of a jokester and, goofing around, and, if they didn't feel it was be able to offer value. And I want to say a special thanks to each one of you for showing up with me. Dwayne, I've always enjoyed your content. I was so jealous of you when I got my 200 to 800 because the weather was garbage here. And at that time of year, it's the shortest day. We get the least amount of light and it's overcast. And I'm seeing you shoot incredible shots with that 200, 800 in Australia on your property. You did a great job with coverage.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
To Professor Jack Wang, thank you so much again for you attending as well. Very much appreciated. Graham, really, thank you so much for joining. Your knowledge from the viewpoint of what you do, really helpful. And look at all those beautiful white lenses you've got up there, the big whites. Some incredible
I have an addiction.
Yeah, well, you know what? If you ever decide you want to sell something for a new one, let me know, because I would love to get some of those primes, but they are just not at a level which I can afford yet. James.
I don't have children, so.
Well, see, there you go. That's huge. James, you have been with me for almost every live stream I've done. I appreciate your attendance, James, your knowledge as a director of photography, a cinematographer. Sometimes it's just you and I, and it's always exciting. We always learn something. So thank you so much. I do appreciate you joining me.
Thank you,
Brian. Oh, you're very welcome. And Brian, the very first time on the channel, thank you so much. I've enjoyed your content. I really enjoyed we kind of collabed when it came to the firmware 1.6. You borrowed some of my stuff. I borrowed some of yours. And it was fun talking to you, and I'm glad we finally got a chance to have you on the channel. So thank you.
Yeah,
so
man,
much.
it was a pleasure. And Simon, I just want to say thank you for, getting this information out there. It's always I know you're one of those channels I always watch, but it's just so exciting to get a chance to be on this panel with all of you guys. And as someone that does a YouTube channel myself and social media, I know how much effort and times it takes to go out there and create that content. And just as someone that watches all of your content individually, it just thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be able to share my voice with you guys and just discuss things that are interesting and fun for us and these tools that really are such a big part of our life.
No, thank you. And thank you to each one of you. And so on that note, I'm going to conclude this broadcast. We peaked at around 1,100 concurrent views, which is absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you again soon. But don't be surprised if there isn't a video for another week, because I'm going to take a bit of time off. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.